All right, welcome back to day 2 of the Green Builder Media Sustainability Symposium 2021 Into the Light. And happy Earth Day to all of you out there. I hope you get a chance to show our planet some love today, but only after the symposium is over. Don't worry, there'll still be plenty of time left in the day. I also want to welcome back our sponsor. Trane Technologies is a world leader in creating comfortable, sustainable, and efficient environments. With a bold set of 2030 sustainability commitments, Trane Technologies is challenging the status quo and taking decisive action now to create a sustainable future where communities thrive, where equality is foundational, and where the environment is protected for future generations. A big thank you to Scott and the whole crew over there for their generosity. You know, as I was reflecting on yesterday's speakers, and if you missed any of it, the recordings will be posted on Green Builder Media's website, but as I was reflecting, a couple of ideas really connected with me. Dr. Mann talked about legacy, and that's a topic I feel very strongly about, and I've written about it from time to time. And Samantha Medlock talked about how we'll be judged by our actions. And since I'm here at home, I can easily look at my desk and I can see the wind turbine that my daughter sculpted a few years ago, and she titled that "The Future." Or I can see a photo of my son's dream of no pollution. And while I'm a proud dad, my point isn't that our legacy is defined by whether we procreate little environmental advocates. Rather, it's that whatever we do, whether it be cleaning up a local park or a highway, turning abandoned railroad tracks into nature trails, planting a pollinator garden, starting a compost pile, whatever it is you decide to do, the important thing is you do. Here to kick off our Earth Day celebration is Andrew Winston. He's a globally recognized expert on megatrends and how to build resilient, profitable companies by helping both people and planet thrive. Named to Thinkers 50 Radar Class of 2020 as a thinker to watch, he is the author of the bestsellers Green to Gold and The Big Pivot. Andrew's latest book, due in the fall, is Net Positive: How Courageous Companies Thrive by Giving More Than They Take. Now you'll have to wait a little bit for the book, but you can watch Andrew Winston right now on your computer screen.
Thank you so much. Good to be here. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you also to the team at Trane. I've known them for a long time. I sit on their sustainability advisory board, so that's a happy coincidence. I am very glad to be here again. For I think some percentage of you who were at the live meeting last January 2020, which was I think 6 or 7 years ago now. Feels like a long time. Luckily, nothing's happened, in that time, so there's nothing new to talk about. It's been a pretty eventful year, and I, personally in my life, being at home in the room you see, and the family kind of getting through this. Also spent a lot of time, working on this new book, and I'll be talking to you today. I mean, the good news for everyone here is that this is kind of the first talk I'm giving with a bunch of content from the new book. The bad news for you is that this is the first talk I'm giving with a bunch of content from the new book. So I would love to get feedback as we go. It's obviously hard virtually. I can't see everyone and see if kind of people are nodding along, but happy to, get comments, questions in the chat, and we'll have some time towards the end to do that. So look, I'm gonna kind of jump right into the deep end.
Hey, Andrew,
yeah.
Before you get going, your Logitech box is covering up some of your slides.
Oh, okay.
Sorry to interrupt you there, sir.
Yeah. That shouldn't be there. Okay, sorry about that.
Oh, looking great now.
And you're not seeing the GoToWebinar stuff, right?
No, you're looking great.
All right, yeah, that shouldn't be showing. Okay, excellent. So tell me if there's anything blocking. Okay, so let me just jump right into the deep end. We are seeing a pretty deep change in what's expected of business and companies. An incredibly fast change in the last year. I mean, just obviously in the last few weeks, you saw a bunch of big companies come out against changes in voting laws, things that companies didn't used to talk about. And so increasingly, you're seeing companies being asked, if not, by the media or something more direct, just by their peers, by their stakeholders, by their employees, where do you stand? What does your organization think about climate, racial equity, LGBTQ rights, democracy itself, and even just the idea of truth and science? Excuse me, which seems kind of crazy to have to ask, but I saw this quote today from Joe Biden having the Global Climate Summit that he's hosting. He said, "I'm proud to say science is back." I mean, I've found it sad that we have to say that out loud, but this is an actual topic, and companies are being asked to say something intelligent about it. So why? Why are companies, what has changed? And I think I've been in this field of sustainable business for about 20 years. And I think in the last, maybe 18, 20 months, there's been more change in what it means to be a company or what's expected than I've seen in the previous 20. And it started even before the pandemic, but the pandemic clearly accelerated it in a very real way. So I'm going to jump into some of the really big mega trends, go through them, try to do them kind of quickly, but just a quick thought on really top line on what do we think the pandemic has taught us over the last year. I mean, there's so much that's changed about the world. But for me, I think that the core lesson, and it ties into everything I'm going to say from now on, is that we're incredibly deeply connected. I mean, I think we knew that on some level, but if we don't get that now, we may never understand it. This is just a picture that to me I found really profound. A couple years before the pandemic started, this was the busiest day of flights in human history, with 200,000 flights in the air in one 24-hour period. It also indicates how a pandemic travels the world. We are completely connected in ways that the world could never imagine, and we're connected at this very human level. I think we all discovered, for those of us who are knowledge workers, who could work like this, who could do what we do at home, we were completely dependent on people that, frankly, we haven't even paid minimum wage to a lot of the time, who are the essential workers. And essential turned out to be everyone, picking our food, delivering it, driving it, getting it into the store, selling it. We were relying on this whole base of people that we had never kind of seen or thought about as much as we should. And I think companies have had to kind of step back and say, what does it mean for us to be more people focused, for our business to be people focused, and connect all of the major issues we're facing? And we have quite literally one immune system. This is the big learning for me. And companies absolutely stepped up. There were some that didn't and made some mistakes in the early pandemic. And then there were some who kind of stepped way back and said, what are we really here for? What are we doing? And Medtronic was one, just a quick story of the many companies that started making things they had never made before. They were doing things they had never done. Supply chains were new. Medtronic just shared the design of their ventilator when we didn't have enough. And so to me, what's kind of become clearer and clearer is that sustainability, we could talk about your carbon footprint or your diversity and inclusion levels and all these metrics, which we need to, but it's fundamentally about the role of business in society. And it is asking some very basic questions, like who are you as a company and as individuals, as leaders, as parts of your company? And at core, that means, who do you serve? Are we serving just short-term shareholders? Are we serving each other, the board, our peers? Are we serving society? How do we serve the world? So I want to go through pretty quickly the grand challenges that still remain. The pandemic has highlighted some, frankly, accelerated some, but there's really the three giga trends that, frankly, can bring down the world. And these are the ones that are still getting worse and are very intense. Inequality, which I didn't spend a lot of my career on. I was more on the green side, but it's become more and more a part of my thinking and discussion, in part because it's actually gotten a lot worse. It was already an issue, and there was a huge divide in how much of the world's wealth or income was in a small number of hands, but it's gotten far worse. In the US, at least the bottom 50% had more than the top 1%, 30, 40 years ago, and now they don't. And so all of the gains since roughly the early 80s have gone to very, very small number of people. And that I don't think is tenable. And it also ties very deeply to our racial equity issues, because these are connected topics, that women get paid less than men, and in particular, women of color get paid less than white men, and men of color as well. So there's this gender and racial kind of built-in structural problem that is tied to our inequality. And so I'll just offer very quickly what I think matters for the sector that we're talking about mainly here. I know most of you are in some sense in the building sphere, but every sector, every business really ties to these issues in ways, and the choices they make, the wages they pay, the opportunities they provide, the diversity and inclusion opportunities. And I think in this case, for this group, affordable housing, are we building the kinds of things that close the inequality gap? Or are we serving the wealthiest? Climate, of course, I used to spend a lot of time on this in my talks, and now I just say climate. It is the existential challenge of our time. I don't think we've ever faced anything quite like it. I watched this young activist, young girl this morning speaking at the virtual global summit. I think she's 13, 14. And she just hammered adults and said, who's being naive if we ask for deep change by 2030? We want zero carbon by 2030, not 2050. She's like, we want joy, we want a future. We all have impacts on this, and the building world, the construction itself, the energy and the building materials, the choices we make in design, and of course the efficiency of the buildings itself. I mean, these mega trends, every sector ties to them, but I think it's easy to say, or clear to say, that the building sector probably ties to them as deep as maybe any sector imaginable, right? There's a huge portion of all emissions that come through the built environment. And it connects to how we use land. So the third grand challenge is biodiversity. It's sometimes talked about as not a subset, but really so deeply connected to climate that it's kind of one argument. And that's part of the way I talk about it at times. But the recent news has not been pretty. It hasn't been pretty for decades, but a very recent study said, 1/3 of land and half of ocean species are on their way to extinct if we keep the warming at 2 to 3 degrees like we're heading towards right now. These are choices we make in the built environment, the land we use, the supply chains you choose, the materials. And so this kind of time we find ourselves in, I think if you work in the sustainability or climate world, it's this very kind of battle going on inside you for optimism and pessimism, because we have gotten to the point where every large company in the world has some form of sustainability. I saw data today that the 22 largest banks of the world, just in the last year or two, their annual reports all said the word sustainability, and almost all of them said climate repeatedly. That's the first time just in the last year. And we're seeing action at the global level, at the national level, at the corporate level on climate, and we'll get to some of that in a way we've never seen. But this horizon we're shooting for is actually still moving away from us. So the business community is getting on board, we're moving, but the science we're shooting for is still getting worse. And this is, if I left it there, this would be pretty depressing. But the good news, and I think part of the reason we're seeing so much activity, is that the opportunities keep rising. And probably the most optimistic thing I've seen, besides maybe the young people and the pressure they've put on people, is just the cost of the clean economy, the investment in it, the numbers every year. I apologize, my dog is probably about to bark really loudly, so I'll try to talk over that. He defends us from the people working in the neighborhood, and he's very tiny. But we have bought more in corporate renewables, and this is not utilities buying renewable energy, but companies buying through their power purchasing agreements, through their sites, and the numbers just keep rising. And they're rising fundamentally exponentially. Even 2020, it still went up quite a bit. Even in a year where the economy shrunk, the amount of corporate purchases of renewables kept going up. And this is now in the 23 kind of gigawatts a year. I mean, a gigawatt's like a pretty large nuclear plant. So this is not small. And the reason is, and I showed some of this data last year as well, the reason is that the cost of renewables, the cost of the clean economy just keeps plummeting. And solar and wind are down a shocking amount. And it's why last year, 90% of the global capacity put on the grid of new power was renewables. And that's been 70, 75, 80, 90 for 3 or 4 years. Like, this battle's kind of over. And again, we all have these impacts, and in the building world, the choices we make in energy and the design themselves really tie very closely to this kind of mega trend on the positive side. The other thing that this kind of positive news does for us is there was one strange outcome, I think, of the pandemic that was a silver lining, which was, this is LA back in April last year, where all of a sudden people didn't know there were mountains near LA and that you could see them. Beijing cleared up. This is not the way to get there through a global pandemic, but we got to see what it would look like if we were operating on clean energy, right? If we weren't putting smog, if the cars were all electric, if the grid was clean, if the buildings were efficient, look how much healthier our lives would be. I think we've all in sustainability done a mediocre job of painting this picture of what it looks like. The other kind of part of the, hey, this is good news story is, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I spent fundamentally most of 20 years making the business case, is just the idea that sustainability pays for business. And that data has gotten much, much clearer and much better. no strategy in the world guarantees that you outperform. That's a ridiculous standard. But by and large, if you start to pull companies that are doing the most, that are addressing their social and environmental issues aggressively, they outperform. They have been clearly outperforming. So the Just Capital is an organization that ranks companies by their performance on stakeholder leadership. It's a lot of the social side, but also their green performance. And they take their top 100 and they looked at them and said, okay, these guys do more. They use double the amount of green energy as their peers. They emit 86% less emissions in the 2.5 PM. They pay their workers more. They give more to charity. They do more in terms of gender and diversity. They are 6 times more likely to set diversity targets. Okay, that sounds like a lot of investment, right? In the old argument about sustainability, you would hear, oh, it's just so expensive. Well, they've had a much higher, 56% higher return on total shareholder return, and a much higher return on equity. These companies are outperforming, and we're starting to see this very clearly in the investment community. The CEO of BlackRock, Larry Fink, in his January letter, which he always puts out, had this statistic, which was that 81% of the sustainable indices around the world outperformed their benchmarks in 2020. That's a really high mark to have so high a percentage of one strategy outperform. And so I just kind of say to everyone who's in this field, we've been fighting this, is it good for business? I think it's time to step out and say, oh, it's not just that it's not worse, it's okay, just it's better. It is performing better. It doesn't mean it always will every quarter, every year. And I don't actually think, frankly, stock price is the best measure, but it is outperforming. On top of this, that's accelerating all of this is the big pressures. And the investors are, because of this better information, this better performance, and kind of the pressure they're feeling to see systemic risk as an issue, investors are becoming finally a pressure that's moving things. And Larry Fink again said in this letter in January, he really focused on climate change and said, there is nobody that's not affected by this transition to a net zero economy, to this tackling of climate. And there's been this consistent investment in sustainability. So these 4 banks, Bank of America, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Citi, all $1 to $2.5 trillion committed over the next 10 years to investing in the clean economy, half to 2/3 of these money, depending on the bank, and then hundreds and hundreds of billions in affordable housing and a bunch of things that help reduce inequality and kind of raise minority communities up. These commitments are all in the last 2 weeks. This is just recently. And just for perspective, back in 2007, right after my first book, Green to Gold, came out, Bank of America contacted me to do some consulting, and they were coming out with really the first commitment of money to invest in the clean economy. And there was a lot of debate internally, the wording of it, that what do we say? And it was 20 billion. That was the commitment they were doing in 2007. So the scale of this has just risen dramatically. And these numbers are up like 500 billion to $1 trillion just from last year. The numbers they're committing are rising. And so PwC says that by 2025, half of all equity investments will be in some form of sustainable investing. This isn't fringe anymore. And the investment community is also starting to use the power of our kind of next big mega trend and forcing factor, which is transparency. So S&P Global has ESG data on over 9,000 companies, and this year they released it and just said it's public. Everyone can see how companies are doing. And so this transparency demand is coming from everywhere, investors, but it is clearly coming from consumers and business customers who want to know what's in everything, who really believe they have a right to know. And we are seeing a new generation, obviously, that is more transparent by nature. I have 2 teenage boys. They are Gen Z. They're 17 and 14. They are the first generation in the U.S. 17 and under is the tipping point where that group now is less than 50% white. It's a much more diverse group. They are connected. They're on their devices all the time. They have a very different view of what business should be. Even millennials who are in that 20 up to almost 40 range have said, because they're in the workforce, they want to find places that share their values. But Gen Z, their view of business is very different. 90% reported in Time magazine said they believe a company has an obligation to solve environmental and social problems. This isn't disconnected from business for them. half of millennials have said they've already spoken out, some very verbally, very publicly, to criticize their own employer on issues around social performance. And that could include climate performance too. I think it's a social issue is a pretty broad thing. So if millennials are that active, what do we think Gen Z is going to be like? I mean, frankly, they're pretty pissed off and they're active. And before the pandemic, they were in the streets all the time, and they're not going away, and they shouldn't. And I kind of thank God for them. So finally, in addition to the kind of generational and transparency pressures, there's just this base resource pressure that is always there. Without going into too much detail, it's getting harder and harder to find metals, to find minerals, to get them cheaply. We get more and more efficient at it, but it takes more and more energy. It takes more and more resources to get the resources. And this is why the circular economy is just going to keep rising as an issue. It's just going to get less and less efficient to try to get virgin materials from everywhere. And we already overuse kind of the world's interest in terms of materials versus kind of the base capital. So we have to slow down that draw. In total, I think we're facing a world that now is profoundly exponential. It's something that I think, don't grapple with very well mentally. We don't have an easy time with exponential change. As humans, we see things in a linear way. And I think we saw that in the early pandemic. The numbers were small at the beginning, but if you understood the math, it was clear how fast it was going to rise. And we're still seeing it in different waves, right? We had the most cases in the world, I think, ever in the last couple of days. We're slowing here finally, because we're doing such a good job with vaccination after doing a horrific job of not having it spread. And then in India, it's spreading like wildfire. So there's these waves that go in very exponential terms. And that's a deep part, I think, of what makes the world what many have called VUCA for a long time. I think it came from the military, a world that's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous. And I think it's moving very, very fast. That's the reality we're all in now. And so what does that all mean for business? We're in this accelerating world. This is the world's largest solar farm. It's pretty darn big. What this all means to me is the problems are still getting bad, especially climate. We have to go bigger. We have to go faster. And it's not enough anymore to just be less bad. We can't just make something incrementally better. We have to start moving into positive territory. And that's what the nature of my next book is. It's coming out in September. I've been writing this with Paul Pullman, the former CEO of Unilever, for the last couple of years, about a year and a half of intense work. So being locked in my home for a year on that level worked out for me. We're defining this in a particular way. I don't think it's too shocking, but I just want to kind of describe what we mean. That a net positive business is one that's improving really everything. It's serving the world, it's serving all stakeholders, and improving the outcomes and well-being for everybody that it impacts. And for a multinational, that's a pretty wide array. For every product, every operation, every region, every stakeholder, employees, suppliers, communities, customers, future generations, and even the planet. Now, this is a North Star, right? Nobody can do this right now as a company. Even there's very few products you could argue kind of fit this, but it's where we need to head, and very quickly. And even doing this and doing it right, and we talk about this in the book a lot, doesn't mean you do it all at once, you get there all at once. There are choices that we will make where it might be moving the needle in the right direction on some dimensions, but maybe slows down things or takes you back a step in others. So the example, that Paul uses a lot is you build a factory, you build a new building, you do something in a new community, maybe in the developing world. You're providing livelihoods, you're helping the economy, but you increase traffic, or the building is in a place where the grid has almost no renewable energy. So the corporate net zero carbon goal goes backwards a little bit. But what that highlights is then, okay, what's the next set of things we need to work on? We build this facility, we provide jobs for people, we're helping improve the level of, say, health and hygiene in this community, or the way manufacturing works. Now we need to work with the local communities, the government, on getting more renewable energy, or dealing with the traffic that this new building or facility made happen. Do we deal with commuting, light rail? Like, it helps highlight what's next so we can get to this place where everything is positive. The kind of 5 core principles that underlie the book are, and the first one is really, in some sense, the crux of it, which is ownership, meaning taking responsibility and ownership of all of your impacts and kind of all dimensions. And I'm going to dive into that more specifically. It's a long-term focus on value creation. It's not quarterly short-term focus. It is serving the world, serving all stakeholders. It's a multi-stakeholder model. And it serves shareholders, but only after you've served stakeholders, and not after as in it does worse. We believe that in the long term, medium and long term, this compounding value is better for shareholders. And Unilever and many other companies have shown that repeatedly, but they come last. They don't come first anymore. And then finally, there's this really deep belief in transformative partnerships. Collaboration is at the core of all of this. If nothing else, if you remember nothing else, it's that these problems we're facing are just too big. It doesn't matter how big a company is. I know there's a range of sizes of companies on the call, and we can talk maybe during Q&A a little bit more about small and medium, but even the biggest guys don't actually have as much influence as you think. And the kind of last story I'll get to will show you that even the largest buyers of a commodity can't change the entire industry. You're going to need these systemic partnerships. So one of the models we have in the book, and don't worry about the size of the font, I'm going to zoom in a minute, is a very kind of basic idea. You know, everyone's got either a model of circles or 2x2 grids. I like both. This is just a circle that says there's a different level of impact that we have. There's a base center that says here's what our direct impact on some dimension of performance is, and it extends out to larger and larger spheres of influence till you have some impact on the whole world. And there's this gap at the center. You have more control, and at the outer ring, very little control, but you try to use influence. So let me give an example of that. So starting with the kind of scopes that we all know from the greenhouse gas protocol, or that most people know, this was kind of the starting point for the thinking. There's kind of three levels, right? There's direct carbon emissions, there's purchased electricity, the grid emissions, and then your scope 3, which is supply chain and kind of customer avoided emissions. If we were just using the term scope, we would just be talking about carbon. So we want to think a little bit bigger than that. Carbon is one of the dimensions, but there's others. But just think what goes beyond that. And there's been a few kind of authors and thinkers that have kind of tried to extend this further and say, okay, beyond just scope 3 is like, what's the sector doing? What are the technologies or the ways that the sector is operating? Is it building circular and regenerative models so the whole sector is reducing its footprint? What are the national and global and kind of regional emissions? And in particular, what policies are we advocating or not advocating for that are helping drive this systemic kind of definition of how do we get to these amount of emissions? Because a company and a sector alone isn't going to do it, right? We need, like today, President Biden saying we're going to cut emissions in half by 2030. That helps to drive all of the inner circles. And then at the largest, the highest level, the kind of broadest level, some have pointed out that a company should try to look at how is it contributing to the way we use resources and energy? How are we contributing to a consumption-based society if you're a consumer products company? And so you can do this kind of thinking along a number of dimensions. So let's take the building sector. I mean, I'm not going to do this perfectly. I think you guys can do this better than I can. But fundamentally, in the same idea of emissions, you've got the construction itself. If you're building a new building, you've got the materials, kind of second degree or back in the supply chain. You got the building in use. How is it designed? The size of it. There's how does it sit in the community, the built environment as a whole. There's policy, again, the building codes, the incentives, what drives us towards healthier buildings or smaller buildings or mixed use buildings or cities that are denser. And this gets into I think the largest scope, which is how do we design our world for humanity and how do we live and work? That's something that every company at every size does contribute to. It doesn't mean you can remotely tackle it alone, but as a sector, you can start to work on it. With others outside of your sector that have similar overlapping issues, you can start to work on it. And I'll get to some of that and kind of this focus on partnership. And then you could take this also, just say a well-being dimension, some dimension of well-being with people. Maybe the core is, you're building a building, how safe are the workers, right? Then there's how safe are suppliers, what's the human rights look like in the supply chain, people living in that building or working in that building, what's their well-being like? I mean, it's been clearly demonstrated that greener buildings, people are healthier, they're more productive, hospitals, they get healthier quicker. There's something about the community at a larger level. When you're building better buildings, what does that do? Community well-being, to people getting around. Again, you get into policy realm. How are we structuring things? Are we helping incentivize people to build more affordable housing? Are we as a sector supporting those policies? And then I think you get back to the same large scope. Some dimensions can kind of zero in and kind of end up at the same point at the largest. At the largest level, this is really how do we live, right? How are we choosing to live? So this is the idea of responsibility in spheres that to me is at the core of what being a net positive company means, because you can take your own emissions to zero, and you should, but the way you're going to have kind of a positive influence is to start to influence these larger circles where you're just a part of it. But if you can help bring down the whole sector's emissions, you're having a net positive impact. There's also a whole bunch we could talk about in the book about leaders and leadership, and you know, I'll just give you one kind of quick example, but there's a lot that's at the core of this, which is who are you as a person? And everyone's a leader, frankly, in some dimension. They have some part of a business that they have control over. It doesn't have to be the CEO. But one of my favorite stories is really the CEO of Merck, Ken Frazier, who, after the last president said that there were fine people on both sides after what was a neo-Nazi rally, he couldn't sit still anymore. I think not just as a Black American, but just as an American, as a human. And he said, we have to reject this hatred and bigotry and group supremacy. And he left the president's manufacturing council very publicly. And that is brave, right? Even these CEOs have so much power, they make a lot of money, but it's still hard to say to the president, I don't want to sit on your council. And then after the murder of George Floyd, he kind of came out again, and he's been vocal over the last year and said, we can lead in the business community. We can lead. We can talk about police reform and how do we give the minority communities access to capital? How do we reduce joblessness and help them develop better opportunities? This is something, again, the business community, if you take the circles of influence and think broader, can have an impact on. And so the core aspects of leadership that we talk about, courage it's in the subtitle of the book, it's important, but there's also this kind of core purpose and duty that you feel as an individual, and how much kind of empathy and humility you bring to the table. One of the most powerful things you can say in the world, and it's really hard to do, is to say, I don't know. And one of the things you see the companies that are leading do is when they put these giant goals out, and I'll talk about a few, they are almost by definition saying, I don't know how I'm going to reach this goal. I have no idea. And that means you're inviting people in. You're being transparent, you're being open. You also hope leaders are inspiring, they walk the talk, that the people who follow them feel like, I trust this person is going to live these values. And again, there has to be this value of partnership. You have to believe in partnership and not kind of going it alone. So I think last year I talked about this, but you know, my role in the world is not really in a way to be the hero, to have the sword and fight the fight against the dragons we're fighting. It's to give people a sword. In a way, I'm the sword. I try to give people frameworks and ideas and tools and stories and try to make it accessible in whatever way I can, because we need heroes at every dimension of society now. We have so little time. And the tool that I'm trying to bring to the world now is our new book. I apologize for the construction noise going outside. There's not much we can do about that these days. And so at the core of the story of being net positive is purpose. Now, there are entire books written. There's a lot you could say about purpose. I'll be fairly quick about it because it's just kind of it's the undercurrent of everything we do. And I'll have a few Unilever stories in this because my co-author was the CEO of Unilever. So there's a few that I think are pretty critical that made them successful. Early on, when Paul Pullman took over as CEO back in 2009, he went back to the archives of the company. And back in the 1880s, they actually built a town, Port Sunlight. It exists in England. It was a town for workers. They built it really before the factories were even built. And they did things that seem like even aggressive today. They built theaters and schools, and they kind of built this community. And their early products were soap. So they had this very clear kind of idea about what they were about. The founder, Lord Lever, one of the two brothers, said, we want to make cleanliness commonplace and to lessen work for women, because women were doing all the housework at that point. And this was the purpose that the company had been on. And Unilever had done a lot of things for 100+ years that fit that, but they had kind of lost the focus on it. And I'll just say this about purpose. I think we sometimes use it interchangeably with values, but they're not exactly the same thing. And it's not the equivalent of sustainability either. You can have a purpose that maybe doesn't take you to a more sustainable place. Philip Morris has a purpose, which is people can smoke if they want to. It's personal freedom. I don't think it takes us to a healthier place. Enron had a purpose, I think, which was to maximize profits. It turned out to be fraud. But you can have a purpose that isn't actually in service. It has to have this overlay of values. And so if we were kind of in an audience with people, I would love to kind of play a game of like showing you a purpose statement and see if you can guess who it is. But I'll just show you a few that I think are inspirational, that I think companies are trying to back up. BEAR, which is saying we want to provide health for all, hunger for none. IKEA has had this for decades, create a better life for the many people. It's a translation, I think, in Swedish, but it just means the billions, not the very few. Schneider Electric in your world, empower all to make the most of our energy and resources. Like, that's their dimension that they're focused on. And Tesla, of course, wants to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. I think these are powerful. There's many more we could find. I think people are finding that purpose. And it's easy to say, well, companies like, Unilever, they had this clear purpose. Not everybody has something that clear, obviously, but every organization was founded for some reason. I mean, there was some reason it came to exist, and there's probably some core idea or belief in the founder. So it's worth kind of going back and saying, why did this happen, even if it's in recent years? So one of the kind of main first steps after finding your purpose is really starting to change your thinking, and what we're talking about is blowing up boundaries. And what that means is, when a company's starting to set its goals and think about what it's trying to do, we're getting used to like net zero goals in manufacturing. Net zero is something that I think we now believe reduces, your footprint, obviously reduces cost, is good for the lots of benefits. But you could first look on it as something that's going to take some investment and some, maybe cost something to do. And the reason it's on the table is not necessarily that zero compared to 80% cut is better immediately. It's on the table because of that resource constraint, because of that outer world issue that we have to reduce resource use entirety. So we're kind of blowing up the boundary of just our four walls of the business and saying we have to set goals as if we're part of a larger set of problems. And that's what I think the global goals or the SDGs really do. It allows a company to say, okay, how do we contribute in the best way? How can we help with reducing poverty or hunger? That's outside of your four walls, right? But you can set a goal around your business, right? That says everyone in our business is going to have fair wages, right? I mean, Walmart's working on this, very difficult issue for them to try to raise wages for their people. And then you start to extend from there and get into the value chain after that. But you have to start with yourself. And so, for example, the rise of net zero or increasingly net positive, but at least net zero commitments. I just wanted to show you some of the companies that have committed or expanded their net zero commitments around basically their operations and maybe their supply chain just in the last 2 weeks. These companies just in the last 2 weeks. And so there's dozens more before this of other very large brands. I include, Train in here, not just because I know them and they're a sponsor. I mean, I've used this example because they have some of the better goals, I think, and some of the more unusual ones in that they are looking forward to how can we reduce the footprint of our customers. It's often in companies, the supply chain and their own operations, but for those companies making things that use energy, and Train is in the middle of one of, besides buildings itself, cooling is really one of the largest challenges we have to solve in the world. If we want to cut emissions, we have to figure out how to make cement or steel or other things differently, and we have to figure out how to cool and heat buildings in a different way that has a much lower footprint. So they've said we want to reduce our carbon footprint of our customers by 1 gigaton. Again, that's a blowing up boundaries kind of goal. There's a few companies that have gone, in some sense even further. Microsoft has said we're going to reduce our own footprint. We're going to be carbon negative, which is confusingly carbon negative, carbon positive, net positive. They all basically mean the same thing. It means not just getting to zero, but going beyond. And they said we're going to reduce our footprint, our carbon footprint, and offset everything going back to the founding of our business. They said this January of last year, and they kept announcing things last year. They're one of the most invested and involved in looking at carbon sequestration technologies, out of air capture, and investing a lot in it because we have to find a way to scale that up. Google, in a kind of good-natured competition, came out mid last year and said, we're going to do the same thing basically as Microsoft. We're going to do it quicker. We're going to offset our entire historic footprint like now. And they set a really interesting goal, which is by 2030, they want to be basically off grid, and not just through power purchasing agreements, but actually on-site generate enough. Nobody knows how to do that, right? I mean, big manufacturing facilities maybe can generate 15%. Data farms are not that much less energy intensive. So there's going to have to be a lot of different kinds of technologies, really good building design, storage. There's going to be a lot of things that need to happen. This kind of boundary shaping really drives innovation. Patagonia, one of the world leaders for a very long time, has been working with a startup on a technology that looks at how they make the insulation, and it uses just drastically, it kind of is a self-bonding insulation, so it cures and it needs much less energy, much less heat, and they have products. Timberland's one of the companies that actually uses net positive in their description of what they're trying to be. They made this boot that uses the PrimaLoft insulation. It uses regenerative agriculture leather, like cows or cattle that are on farms that are sequestering carbon. It is potentially a net positive product if it comes from those ingredients. This is what I think innovation looks like now. This is what climate innovation looks like. It isn't just, do we take our building and our factories and reduce to zero? How do we design things or make things that are reducing footprint in a larger way elsewhere? And you're seeing these kind of boundary breaking goals on social dimension as well. Huge amounts of money going into communities. City said they've got kind of $1 billion of kind of direct investment to close very specifically close the racial wealth gap. $500 million going into home ownership for people of color, affordable housing, built by minority developers. These are the kinds of things we're seeing concrete goals on just in the last year. A bunch of companies after the George Floyd murder said we have to do something to drive more economy into the Black community. And Sephora was just one that said, we're going to buy 15% of our products on our shelves are going to come from Black-owned businesses. That's one way to kind of set the standard. And if you shape your boundaries wide enough and think, what are we really about? You end up in a place like Ørsted, a Danish energy company that about 10, 12 years ago basically blew up its whole model. They were oil and natural gas, and now they're the world's largest producers of offshore wind. They're on their way in the next couple of years to basically zero carbon from a huge production of carbon. The boundaries that we're working with, I'm not going to spend more than 30 seconds on this, but I recommend everybody kind of check out the idea of donut economics from the economist Kate Raworth, that there's basically these thresholds. So it's a weird kind of tension that we have to look beyond our own boundaries, but accept that in the larger sense, there are boundaries, there are thresholds in the world. There's only so much climate change we can take on, only so much ocean acidification. And on the thresholds kind of on the human side, if we want people to live in a thriving way, we need to make sure everyone has enough. They have energy, they have water, they have food, they have health, they have education. And what Raworth describes as kind of this donut in between the minimum standards for people and the thresholds of the planet is this donut, this kind of very safe operating space that we have to be shooting for in everything we do. It's a very simple, elegant model, but it's worth checking out. The other dimension of kind of getting towards net positive is going to be embracing transparency. It's going to be challenging. It's hard. Unilever was one of the first really major companies to do a human rights report. They asked Oxfam in the early 2010s to look at one country in Vietnam and assess very honestly, and then they put out a global human rights report. And one of the charts here shows all the non-conformance issues on health, on wages, on discrimination by country, how many complaints they had, and then they had data on how fast did we address them. This is not easy, right? It's painful to do, but again, you're saying to the world, we're working on it, help us do this. Looking at the time, because this is an experiment for me as well, I'm going to speed through a few things and have to say, I hate to do this, just go by the book, I guess. There's a lot in the book about partnerships, and I just want to say a few things before we take some questions. So there's a mix of initiatives that we all do, that companies are taking on when it comes to making their business more sustainable. And if you think of it as kind of a pyramid, the majority today are really in that four walls, like how do we cut our emissions, water use, et cetera. If you get out of that four wall zone, you get into the partnership realm, the orange parts of this, which is partnerships with your value chain, with your sector and your peers, with systems. This chart is probably optimistic in what the mix of initiatives is today. I think for most companies, the blue is almost all of it. There's very little going on at the systems level. And that mix needs to change. If we want to have change at scale, you need to have something that looks different. So if you imagine that same pyramid of the stuff we do today as this little triangle, there's a much bigger triangle of impact that has a reverse shape, where the stuff we do in our own kind of boundaries and we shape zero carbon, zero waste, they give way to much larger partnerships, what we call in the sector and your peers and your value chain, 1 + 1 = 11, where there are these multiplier effects because you're working together. And then what we're calling it takes three to tango, because the three major elements of society, government, civil society, and business, have to work together on an enormous range of issues for us to make progress. And so all of this means we need partnerships. I'll just give a couple quick examples. I'm going to skip over something I talked about last year. Let's talk about like what a sector can do, what industry and their peers can do. The consumer goods forum, it's fascinating. You can do very kind of targeted, seemingly small things, like they agreed to standards on pallets. I learned something in studying this that I could never have imagined. There are 10 billion pallets in the world, more than one for every human. There are more people working in the pallet industry than dig up coal in the world. It's like 60,000 people. And they agreed on standards which allows trucks to be packed tighter. As you think about endless distribution centers, retail, consumer products, the manufacturers that are using pallets, and you can pack trucks something like 58% tighter if you have standard design. That's just much more efficient. Fuel, carbon emissions, that's just an easy efficiency to try to bring across the sector. So you can do something from that kind of standard of operations. They agreed on barcode design for consumer products, so you could get the same information from everyone, all the way up to checking your whole business model to try to deal with something like packaging. If you're not familiar with the loop experiment going on right now, it's really interesting. There's companies from a lot of different consumer products, food, not direct competitors, some of them are, some of them aren't, where there's a set of packaging that everybody chooses from, and you order stuff, it comes to your home, and then you send it back and they clean the packaging and put it right back into the system. So you're not getting a bottle of shampoo or ice cream or whatever and then throwing it out and it has to go get recycled. This is the kind of effort. I don't know if this is going to work. It could fail as an experiment, but it's a great experiment. It's what needs to happen. There's the work with NGOs, the kind of traditional partnerships. UNICEF and Unilever have worked for about 15 years on hand washing around the world. It's one of the most successful partnerships we've ever seen in kind of community health development. About 1 billion people have been reached with this. They've taught kids and mothers, mothers of newborns or expectant mothers, about hand washing, and it's greatly reduced the number of people dying from diseases of poverty, things like diarrhea. A huge reduction, and it saved millions of lives. And then finally, there's what we're calling in kind of a whole chapter about systems change, a different kind of advocacy, what we're calling net positive advocacy, meaning instead of walking in and asking for less regulation or something that helps your business in a very narrow way, looking for the opportunities to say, what would we need to do to change the system so that everybody does better? And there's actually one of my favorite stories in the book, because it's so bizarre, but it's about Unilever Russia, and they had developed all this capacity themselves for making recycled content packaging. And then they went to the government and didn't ask for tax breaks for developing all that capacity. They figured we'll get the investment back because we think we're going to sell more. People like this, the consumers like it. It's 100% recycled. They went in with an academic from Moscow University and said, let's redesign the incentives in the country. Right now, the country was trying to incentivize less packaging by basically charging everybody by the ton. And they said, let's design the fees based on what the material is. Not the weight exactly, but how much recycled content. So you incentivize everybody to move down this path and bring down the costs for everybody. This is self-serving for Unilever, but it's serving the whole sector at once. And there's this idea that I find really powerful, which is it's okay to do pre-competitive stuff and make everybody advantaged if you're solving a group problem. If you're kind of better capable, you have more capabilities, your company's focused on purpose, your people are excited, if you're ready to take advantage of that systemic change quicker, you'll get the advantage. So don't worry about like working together for systemic change. If you're in a better position, you will get advantage. And then I can come back to this story about palm oil, maybe during the Q&A. It's kind of the largest systems example out there. And then just finally, I'll say, look, everything I just said is tough to do. Not easy, nobody said it's easy. But there's this kind of excitement, I think. If you start to go down this path and you make your business more and more net positive or closer and closer, it's a little bit like when you run your first 10K or marathon. I have not done that. But you hit this kind of, well, what else can I do? Maybe I do a triathlon. And it starts to bring in a set of issues that we think even bigger and say, how does society work? Don't we as business need to start to question consumption in the way we do it? Question, what does growth mean? And that's a much larger conversation to have. What does well-being mean? How are we structuring capitalism? It's clearly got problems. How are we supporting democracy around the world? How are we supporting science and fact? It brings us back around to the things that companies are being asked to chime in on anyways. And it comes down to, what do you value? What do we value? What kind of world do we want? Don't we want one where everybody thrives, where everybody lives in that donut, that safe donut? And as Paul's always said, business can't sit on the sidelines anymore, watching this system that gives us life. So I'm always asking people, that I speak to, how are you going to contribute? Think about how you can be net positive. I think about this a lot in my own life with my kids, with my family, my community, and in the work that I do. And how are we going to be heroes? How can you be a hero in this situation? Our future completely depends on the answers to those questions. I thank you very much. I went a few minutes over. I would love to take some questions. I think we got like 10 minutes. I thank you for being my guinea pigs. I think I now know I probably need like 50 minutes, 55 to do it, but I'll shorten some things. So I will, I'm gonna, I think, stop sharing so maybe I can see the Q&A. I think Mike was gonna come back on. Let me see if I can.
I am on there, sir. How are you?
Hey, good. Let me, I'm not sure how to stop share. Hold on, let me stop sharing.
That's all right. You can leave it. You can leave it. It's okay.
All right.
They can see us. They can see your slide. It's all good.
Yep.
All right. So we do have a couple of questions for you. The first one is, that right now, today, there are 40 global leaders meeting as part of the Biden administration's climate summit.
Yep.
So it's a twofold question. What do you think will come out of that? And do you think that the U.S. will or can really hit a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030?
Do we have an easier question we can start with? What will come out of it? Look, I won't say I'm an expert on policy. I think for the most part, as important as the Paris Climate Accord was, and it was critical, part of the reason it happened was companies were there. In 2015, I was at, I don't go to the climate meetings usually, but I was at that one because there was a big corporate event, right, on the same kind of premises as the negotiations. And they brought together CEOs, hundreds of CEOs. It was that business was there to say, we're taking this seriously. I guess it's not that it's just a lot of talk. I think that the world leaders getting together is critical. They've made some new commitments today. We'll see the news tomorrow about what commitments. It's important to keep pushing each other. But let's be honest, the Paris Climate Accord, only if everyone gets there, and we're not on track, only gets us to 3 degrees warming, which frankly, I don't think we know we can survive. I mean, we're not on track for thriving at this point. And this is why I always, in my work, and believe that I have to keep coming back to business. We're gonna need everybody, but I really feel like business is gonna have to accelerate. And again, the economics for some of this is already there. We can go much faster on the clean economy, but can we get by 2030? Yeah, is it technically feasible? Yes, I really think it is. I mean, but it would require doing some things as a society and excuse me, and policy-wise that I don't know if we can do in our country. Maybe in some countries, I think in the more common good-oriented countries like Northern Europe could probably do this. I don't know if you saw, Washington State just said by 2030 they want to sell, you're not going to be allowed to sell a combustion engine. That's great, but if we're going to cut in half, we probably have to take combustion engines basically off the road by 2030, not just stop selling them, but take them off the road. That's a buyback, that's a cash for clunkers. We're going to start seeing the countries that really can get their people together do that. And that means shutting down coal plants or natural gas plants before their life is done, before their financial life is done. It means actually shutting stuff down so we can build the new. Again, the economics are moving so fast that it's, in many places, it's already cheaper to build solar and wind than keep operating a coal plant. But still, there's a lot of invested assets. So do we have the technologies? Do the people on this call, does the building industry know how to make buildings drastically more efficient? Yes. Do we have the will? I think we know we have the technologies and we have the capital. We can debate how much debt we should go into as a country, but when the pandemic hit, something like $20 trillion has gone in from governments into the economy to help save jobs and lives and has been pretty effective at keeping the economy going. We have that money, right? It's trillions. We need trillions. So I think we can. I think it's going to be a race. And I don't know if we'll get there directly. I think we'll get there in pockets. I think some product categories, some things will get there and some won't. Some parts of the world might get there quicker than others. And we just have to find the best practices and accelerate them and try to bring it to everybody.
All right, we got 3 more questions if you're okay with that, Andrew.
Yeah.
So we've got one coming in from Cindy. She wanted to know, what are your ideas for construction industry players to be net positive in terms of diversity and equity?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, the measurements and metrics on the social side of the equation are always a little harder, but they've gotten better. I mean, companies, like I said, Sephora is saying 15% of our shelf space will be Black owned. I think it's the same with any industry now. Any company can say what percentage of the materials, the contractors we're working with, the partners, the suppliers are Black and minority owned, and make that part of the procurement. Also, you're seeing companies with pretty aggressive targets on gender parity in pay, on racial increase of racial representation in management. All of that is on the table. I think it's harder in some sectors. I think construction, it's a little more difficult, but you got to go with what's feasible and go as fast as you can. But sometimes it's really just about setting those goals. I mean, Unilever hit gender parity a year ago in terms of pay. Women make the same as men in Unilever. It took them 8 years. I mean, they started, so kind of the answer is get started now, right? Some of this is going to take a while. So set the goal that you want it to look like and get going. But I also think the industries can also help bring the farm team up, right? Can have to look at schools, engineering schools, can start to try to foment for more people of color to come into a sector. Like, all that has to happen as well. And I think it can.
Economic question coming in from Rob. There's some fair concerns about the income disparities that are arising, and they're significant between the old energy economy and the new energy economy. And it applies not just to energy sources or resource extraction, but even the supply chain is also, in his opinion, more limited and lower paid, both in manufacturing and in transport. And the example he cites is something like Newton, Iowa, where Maytag used to have major manufacturing operations there. Those are gone, but the town now has wind turbine manufacturing. But the problem, and according to Rob here, is that it requires a fraction of the labor force and it pays a fraction of the wage.
This is really hard. I mean, this is a really hard discussion to have, because if you take a single town, move from one industry to one similar industry, yes, those numbers could change. It's really different to look at it at the sector, national, global level. Yeah. Will energy look different? Yes. I mean, look, the reason the fossil fuel companies are fighting this transition so hard is not just obviously there's trillions and trillions of dollars, but fundamentally the energy business will be smaller. It takes fewer people to have wind. It's going to take a lot to build all the wind turbines and the solar and to service them, but over time it takes fewer people, right? I mean, our variable costs, the inputs for the solar on my house is free. So there's nobody going out to dig up solar. It's going to be fewer people in the long haul. Right now, we need a lot, right, for the building. So there's this massive build out for the world and bringing energy to parts of the world that don't have it. So you can't, I mean, honestly, I know how hard this is to say for me on the outside to say, okay, Iowa, deal with it. But I think part of the answer then is we have to be passing laws and putting money in place to help people transition and help these communities. There are communities that will be smaller, right? There are places, if you go drive through Nevada, Utah, used to be mining communities that aren't anymore. There will be places that used to be steel that aren't anymore. You have to provide the money. And again, we have the money. Like, you could pay every coal miner $1 million for their retirement or their transition, and it's like $50 billion. That's like nothing these days. I don't mean to sound like, we have that money. I think we have to treat people, again, it comes back to the very beginning. I said, how people focused are we? If we think of this not as just an electron transition, but a people transition, then we treat people well. We thank them for their service and bringing us the fossil fuels that got us to today's level of society, but we help them transition, or we teach them something new, or they retire, because we can't give them jobs just to keep coal going when we'll die. I mean, it sounds like a stupidly simple statement, but we have to stop emitting carbon. And so I think it's about how do we treat people.
All right, last question. Just have a few seconds for it. Jack wants to know, what's your thought on the naysayers, those in the party of no, that don't want to change on the federal level? Do we just work at the state, the city, and the regional levels and forget about the feds?
Yeah, look, this is hard to answer without, look, let me be really honest. I'm going to be honest in my life. I hit 50 last year. I've decided I'm going to say what I'm going to say and people will take it. When you talk about the federal level and the difference there, it's literally by party. Like, let's not kid ourselves. On climate, it is by party. There is not a single federal level GOP representative who's really supported anything climate related in many years. It's a little different at the state level. Yes, so I think state and local work, you'll see people working on climate issues in Southern Florida, even if they're Republican local county commissioners, because the water is coming up to their ankles. Like, it's much more real at the local level. I know so many people working in this space of trying to get policy passed for decades. They've been telling me, I keep hearing that there are Republicans just about to come to the table on climate bills at the national level, but I kind of feel like it's Lucy in the football. I just feel like the only way I know that stuff gets passed is if we put people in place and they get elected who want to do it. And I think we've hit a place where one party has put it into their core belief system that acting on climate in particular is against their views. I don't know why. It's a long history of melding science and politics in a way that, frankly, again, the fossil fuel companies helped make happen. I mean, they made it like it was a mess when really it's science with a side of politics and it's not politics. And so I think we have to get people willing to vote for a price on carbon, for vast investment in the new technologies to keep the scale going. And I don't really care what party they are, but right now it's just one party. I got to be honest. And so, like, if Republicans come around and start voting for this stuff, great. We might not even get Joe Manchin, let alone on the Democratic side. So, I mean, it's not like it's just a Republican problem, but it's mostly. So look, I think you got to, what I'm hoping is that the business community, which has deep inroads into that party, and people who are Republican on the call your reps, talk to them, let them hear from not just their fossil fuel donors. Let them hear that you want to see some action happen and you want the kinds of policies that make buildings far more efficient and greener and get our grid and our transportation system to a clean level. Make that clear. That's the only way I know how to make change happen.
Well, thank you for your time, Andrew. Always good to see you again. Enjoyed my time with you a year ago and enjoyed our time again today. So thank you, Andrew.
We'll be live again someday. We'll be in person again someday. So thank you all for having me. Please, visit my site or LinkedIn or something and let me know if you have any thoughts on everything you saw, stuff that didn't make sense. I'm all ears right now. So thank you so much.
Okay, no problem. Take care, sir. And sorry to those of you who sent in wonderful questions. I mean, absolutely wonderful questions that we just didn't have the time to get to. All right, the next segment of our program is brought to you by the letter C. Here to talk about cognition, smart data, is a CrossFit-loving county commissioner from Colorado who is also the CEO of Green Builder Media. She is cool, calm, and collected, and her name is Sara Gutterman.
Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate it. And I'm just always fascinated by what Andrew has to say. So what a great presentation. Lots of food for thought in that one. So for those of you who were with us yesterday, we heard Michael Mann. He spoke about climate science. We heard Andrew Beebe talk about innovations that are transforming markets. We heard from Samantha Medlock from the Biden administration talking about climate policy. And then, of course, we had Andrew's wonderful presentation this morning about really more what we can do from a business standpoint and kind of a collective change standpoint. This section now that I am joining forces with some of my good friends, Sam Rashkin and Jean Myers, to kind of close our symposium with is really focused on the building industry, the housing sector, and the transformation that our sector is undergoing right now. And I'm actually really happy to be able to present today some brand new breaking research on millennials. We've heard a lot of talk over the last couple of days in our symposium and just in general about the impact and influence that millennials and older Gen Zs have on our entire economy, and particularly in the housing market. And so I just really want to focus on some of the insights that we've been harvesting into that market, because millennials and older Gen Zs have really seized that influencer position in the housing market, spending more money on buying and remodeling homes than any other audience segment. And I think that they're important to understand in our sector. But again, as we've heard from our other presenters, Michael Mann, Andrew Beebe, Sam Medlock, Andrew Winston, they're important across the entire economy. They're important because of the social justice changes that are happening in our society, as well as certainly really propelling environmental and climate action. So what I'm going to start with, though, is where I normally start, which is just some general housing market data. We all know that the housing market has really been the bright spot of the economy, one of the bright spots of the economy over the course of the past year. And the good news is that all of the metrics that we are tracking, from home value growth, sales volume, starts, permits, et cetera, they're all projected to continue to grow throughout 2021 into 2022, even into 2023. We do expect a little bit of a mitigation of prices, home prices, over the summer and into the fall, partly because of the fact that we start seeing some foreclosures kind of hitting the market, and we also anticipate that inventory is going to catch up a little bit with some of the demand. But again, we're really, expecting prolonged growth. We do not forecast a housing bubble, and this is especially true as the overall economy is expected to continue to grow over 5% this year, and again into 2021 and 2022. The remodeling market is seeing, a similar level of surge and momentum as, the new home construction and buying market. In fact, remodeling in some markets is up by about 75% over the course of the past year, and the average amount that's being spent on remodeling projects is up over $5,000 per project. And again, we expect continued momentum, where about 78% of homeowners that we surveyed indicated that they are planning at least one home improvement project in the course of 2021. I've shown these numbers. I just checked the most recent numbers, and it still pays to own. So when you look at the national median monthly cost for a rental, it's about $1,740, and the national median mortgage payment on a monthly basis is about $1,400. So it's about $300 less to own a home right now than to rent, partly because of low interest rates. Probably not surprisingly, the places where homeowners and home buyers are getting the most value are those secondary and tertiary and even rural markets, not the higher priced, more dense urban markets. It's definitely a seller's market. So homes are selling fast. They're selling in some markets for more than their asking price. In fact, I'm hearing stories all the time about homes selling literally within hours of being listed at 1.5 or 2x their asking price. Some really extraordinary tales and numbers. But not everybody can afford to buy right now, partly because of the inventory shortage and also just for financial reasons. So we're really seeing a huge surge in the build to rent sector. It's one of the fastest growing sectors of the US housing market. And again, it's really being bolstered by affordability issues and concerns. So, for example, millennials and older Gen Zs, while over 90% of them consider home ownership a good investment, a little under 50% say that they really can't buy a home right now because of student loans and credit card debt or lack of savings. Some people also just want the flexibility of renting. So they like having a landlord handle maintenance, and they like having the access to community amenities like open spaces and walking trails without having the financial overhead of owning a home. And then again, of course, inventory is so tight that some people, even who have the financial resource and the inclination to buy homes, they just can't find one that they like or that they want to buy. Some other trends that we're following, there is lots of capital out there. It's a very virtuous cycle right now. Builders are seeking larger lines of credit. Those credit lines are based on pre-sales as opposed to spec projects. They're repaying those lines of credit as we are tracking them on time, which has reduced risk and lowered the cost of capital. We're also seeing diversification of portfolios. I mentioned build-to-rent communities, but that also includes single and multifamily projects at lower price points. I think, over the past decade, maybe even more than that, builders had moved away a bit from entry-level and move-up projects, frankly, because it was more profitable to build and sell higher-end homes. And look, builders are in business to do business and stay in business. So, but now, given kind of the needs and the financial reality of today's home buyers, again, many of whom are those millennials and older Gen Zs, builders are recognizing that they really do need to fill a white space that exists in that single and multifamily project development at lower price points. And then, of course, we're seeing more amenity-based communities that include things like walking trails and community gardens, co-working spaces, and just community gathering areas. Another big trend that we are tracking that has totally changed the housing sector is the enhanced digitization of the entire industry. And that starts on the front end with virtual permits and inspections and appraisals, which has really created a lot of efficiencies in the market. But then on the back end as well, the amount of home buyers that are now willing to purchase homes sight unseen is astounding. And that again is really driven by millennials and Gen Zs who are digital natives, totally comfortable buying large purchases online. So that's definitely a trend that's going to continue. We all have heard about this exodus from urban areas in the era of COVID. The numbers prove it. The numbers are there. Large metro urban core counties are losing people, whereas secondary, tertiary, even rural markets are gaining people. And of course, that's all facilitated by remote work, as well as the fact that people, I think home buyers historically have really preferred move-in ready new homes. But just with the lack of inventory, home buyers are not necessarily turning their nose up at homes that need work. And even millennials and Gen Zs we're finding they are willing to invest in homes that may be older, that need work done, again, just because they can afford them. But one thing that we are noticing as people move from denser urban areas and even medium density inner suburbs to less dense outer suburbs and kind of other further away communities, what we're finding is that a lot of the neighborhoods that were built in the second half of the 20th century don't really fit today's home buyers' needs. So there's a lot of retrofitting that needs to happen, partly because a lot of these older suburban homes have moisture and structural and durability problems. They have, potential health risks, or large energy bills, and some of them were built with lead and asbestos. Also, some of those older homes don't have the types of floor plans that today's home buyers are looking for. Today's home buyers want these lifestyle-enabled floor plans where they can work from home, school from home, work out and do home health care, all in these flexible floor plans, as opposed to more formal, dedicated dining rooms that are used maybe once or twice a year, but they still need to be heated and maintained all year round. Another transition that we're seeing in suburbia is just a change in general land planning. Interestingly, as home buyers are moving away from owning vehicles towards kind of the ride-sharing economy, the model for those 20th century suburbs has become very outdated because it was very vehicle-focused. The architecture was focused on, garages, right? Garages really dominated that home architecture. And oftentimes there were, 2, 5, 10, even up to 20 times as many parking spaces in these suburban communities as there actually are vehicles owned by homeowners today. So we're seeing a transition in land planning. So rather than having big sweeping parking, garages or parking areas, those areas are turning into walking trails and community gardens and mixed use facilities and other amenities that are a little bit more desirable. So COVID has definitely changed homeowners' expectations. Homeowners and buyers are really thinking about home differently, thinking about home as a sanctuary space, the place where we are the most safe, where we can cultivate well-being and health and peace of mind. And COVID has really pushed the concept of healthy home to the forefront of our national dialogue, with IAQ now extremely important, or very important, to about 92% of the home buyers that and homeowners that we survey. And there's also been a little bit of a shift in kind of the long-term thinking about home, where home buyers are not just looking at lowest upfront cost or price per square foot, but they're shifting to a little bit of a different valuation metric that includes sustainability, health and wellness, resiliency, and durability, finally, because we've been working towards that for a long time. So as I mentioned, a lot of this change in homeowner expectations and preferences is being driven by millennials and older Gen Zs. They're very bullish about buying homes. They have this growing desire for financial independence. They're hitting their peak home buying potential. The most active millennial home buyer is a dual income, college educated couple that maybe have been living in a denser urban environment or a multifamily setting that want more space. Maybe they have started or are just about to start a young family. They have a very strong ethic of sustainability, and as I mentioned, they're digital natives, very at home in the online world. In fact, many of them have worked remotely for most of their careers. And these millennials are definitely pursuing different home ownership models, right? They're not just buying homes and living in them. They may be renting out part of those homes. They may be pooling funds with friends or family for down payments. They may be purchasing accessory dwelling units so they can have multi-generational living, bringing their parents in, or buying an ADU for them to live in on their parents' property, etc. But one interesting thing about this audience group is that while they have some very clear ideas about what they want, their knowledge base is it's fairly nascent. So there's a lot of opportunity for education and for engagement and interaction to help this audience segment really understand how to get what they want. And what is it that they want? They want efficient, compact, healthy, smart spaces that don't have big long-term costs of home ownership, which they get. They understand the long-term cost of home ownership, not just that lowest upfront cost, as I mentioned. They want to be self-sufficient. They want to have on-site food production and power production. And they definitely want a connection with nature. Now, this audience is a very mission-driven and values-based audience segment. They are disruptors. They like to do different things a little differently because they really prioritize purpose over paycheck. And so I think that's really important to understand if you are, interacting with this audience segment, because at the end of the day, about almost 3/4 of them are willing to spend more for sustainable products and homes. So just some findings from our recent survey of millennials. This audience segment values happiness, protecting the environment, health and wellness, being liked and respected, and spending time in nature. Those are some of their top values. Things like having children, traveling, service to others, and working from home are a little less important to them, although those are all certainly important elements. When making buying decisions about where to live, they really value neighborhood quality and safety, location, freedom to travel, healthy home, and proximity to open space and activities. Again, healthy home, this continues to be a theme that's of highest interest to this audience segment. In fact, when we survey our millennial audience, they tell us that they really believe that healthy home is a basic and fundamental homeowner right. And in some cases, they believe that healthy home is more important than location when making home buying decisions, and that's really never happened before. Of course, smart home technology, sustainable products, and net zero energy are all right up there in terms of priorities as well. They want garages, yards, and outdoor decks and patios, things like pools, hot tubs, on yoga and meditation studios, a little less important to them. When we asked about, kind of the thing that they like the least about shopping for a home, they're caught up in the same cycle, right? Everything's too expensive and they're getting outbid, or the homes that they're bidding for are going off the market too quickly. So that's definitely a theme, that goes into that millennial segment. They're trying to be cost conscious and savvy. So when we asked how much money they're saving for a down payment, it's somewhere in that $11,000 to $50,000 range. For the millennials who have purchased homes already, they actually ended up putting down somewhere between $26,000 to $75,000. So they had a little bit more financial resource to put down than those who are currently saving for homes. Sustainability is undeniable to this audience segment. It is, very important or extremely important by far. And it's definitely a factor when making decisions, really about anything. Again, this audience segment is interested in connecting with nature, having more outdoor living, having a home gym, just, kind of having room to move in general. And when we asked about kind of the ideal home size, it's somewhere in that 1,500 to 2,500 square foot range. Interestingly, about 50% of our respondents actually owned their own home, and about 55% live in the city, even though a lot of them indicated interest in moving out to the suburbs. About 40% lived in the suburbs. As I mentioned, most are dual income, college educated couples. But unmarried women are buying homes faster than unmarried millennial men, and they're actually buying homes that are a little bit more expensive, even though they make less than their male counterparts. We also found that about 14% of the millennial population is considered to be upper income, nearly 30% are middle class, and about 57% are in the lower income bracket, really enforcing the need for what I said earlier, for more kind of entry level and move up level, kind of cost effective and affordable housing. And, again, while a lot of millennials indicated that they would prefer new homes, they're definitely, making purchase decisions that are budget based, and so they are purchasing older homes. The median home sale price for millennials was about $250,000. The typical home was just a little under 1,800 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. Andrew Winston mentioned Gen Zs as well, and I think we really need to keep an eye on that segment because, first of all, they currently have about $140 billion in annual spending power, but that's growing to about $680 billion by 2025. They are spending more money on lines than in stores, mostly through Amazon. They're very influenced by their friends and their family when making purchase decisions. They're very diverse. Andrew mentioned that there's actually, more non-white Gen Zs than white Gen Zs. They want the government to be active and activist. So I think that's really driving a lot of the social justice and action, change that we're seeing right now. And they're also looking to be the most well-educated segment. So I'm going to wrap up and hand things over to my colleague Sam Rashkin, but let me just finish with a few kind of questions. COVID has clearly changed our collective psyche, the housing market, and our economy in general. I think some of the questions that I have, revolve around, well, what will that systemic long-term change be? Will we continue to see an outflow from cities? Will we continue to see remote work kind of marginalizing the importance of living close to offices? What will that kind of long-term impact be on households? And I think that we right now, a lot of home buyers are making decisions certainly on financial elements and their budgets, but they're also making very emotional decisions. So will that continue to kind of turn the housing market upside down? And then last thing is, what we have seen is over the course of the past, year, and particularly the last 6 months, there has been a marked increase in the level of sophistication of consumers and home buyers. I think Andrew Winston, really spoke to some of that just from kind of a general economic level. But I think when it comes to home buying, consumers are becoming more discerning. They understand that they can ask for more in terms of energy efficiency and solar and healthy homes and smart home technology and resiliency, because they see the impact that those areas have on their quality of life. And so we think at Green Builder Media, we think it's a tremendously exciting time because we believe we are at the beginning, not even at the brink, but in the beginning of massive transformation within the housing sector in particular, but within our general economy, and that we all have a role to play, and we all have an opportunity to really help facilitate that change. So to talk a little bit more about that change and disruption and transformation in the housing market, I'm going to hand it back to Mike to introduce Sam Rashkin.
Thank you, Sara. Very much appreciated. Always good to hear some of those insights that you've got. Many of you do know our next guest. He recently retired from his position as the Chief Architect of the Building Technologies Office. He's the author of Retooling the U.S. Housing Industry, How It Got Here, Why It's Broken, and How to Fix It. And his forthcoming book is called Housing 2.0. That book is the basis for the content in Green Builder Media's Housing 2.0 educational program. So please welcome a friend of the industry and someone passionate about housing, Sam Rashkin. We'll get Sam on here in just a moment.
Okay, I should be there.
There you are, Sam. How are you?
Great. Can you see me?
Yep, there you are.
Excellent. Hey, it's great to be here, and I'm excited to be working with Green Builder Media on Housing 2.0. What I hope to do right now is to set the context for the zero imperative and the climate imperative for housing. And if we're going to be successful in that effort, we have to make sure they are prepared for what lays ahead for the industry. And so I want to talk about crisis-driven disruption and how housing's long overdue. And so let's begin by explaining via images just what disruption looks like. This is New York City, 1903, Easter Day Parade, Fifth Avenue. And where's Waldo? Question would be instead, where's the car in the sea of horse and buggies? And I'll highlight for you, there's that one car in the parade. Fast forward 10 years, and essentially the question flips to where's the horse and buggy? And again, I'll fast forward to where it is in the parade in the sea of cars, and disruption happens. And it happens often for a reason, and often it's crisis driven. I apologize for this image. I know it's a little bit disturbing, but essentially in the 1890s and early 1900s, Europe, big cities in Europe and the US were suffering the most amazing environmental crisis of its time. Personal transportation via horse and buggy was creating a massive environmental challenge. Take New York, for example, 100,000 horses, 2.5 million pounds of manure a day. And the crisis was the human experience every day in the city, visual, odor, health. It was truly time for disruption. And if you were making investments in better horse and buggies or better poop collecting devices, you were absolutely off track. The car was about to happen. And I'm going to suggest that there are, in fact, the same setting right now for the housing industry. There are 5 crises driving 4 disruptions. And the 5 crises I want to speak to are the lack of user experience optimization. And Sara spoke so well about just how rising expectations are just growing exponentially. Lack of affordability, lack of trades, lack of productivity, and lack of digital technology application. None of these should sound foreign to any of you, but together when you look at them, it's an historic convergence of true pain points in the industry like it's never seen. As Sara mentioned, just everyone's online before they shop for homes. Virtually even the baby boomers are almost 90% online, and it's virtually everyone is going before they buy a home. And these rising expectations linked to a whole array of different performances or expectations for experiences, whether it's performance or daylight, health, outdoor space, storage, smart, color and lighting. Every one of these is a transformative experience for the user. And the degree that they're not being optimized is truly amazing. And the way it will truly manifest itself, I think, within the industry in a very short time as we see a rapid growth in peer review for the industry. And what's really stunning about this particular website, peer review, is the numbers. In some cases, over 1,000 reviews. I've redacted the names of the builders to not get in trouble, but you have to ask your question, how can a 1, 2-star, even 3-star builder compete with the 4 and 5-star builders side by side? It's a huge filter, and it's the largest purchase of a lifetime. I won't even go to a restaurant if it's 3 or 2 or 1-star restaurant. What is my proclivity buying a home not to gravitate it to the highest peer review builders? It's a huge filter. And more importantly, the data shows that in every industry that the user experience leaders are just the most successful. They outperform by far. In the case of just comparing the stock performance of user experience leaders to laggards, it's like 3 times the outperformance in terms of financial metrics, return on investment for the user experience leaders, and they outperform the S&P 500 by about 60%. This is just a huge differentiator in terms of financial performance, but also resilience. Another study looked at how user experience leaders perform during downtimes, and it was 3 times greater performance for the leaders versus the laggards. And I have that own experience in my own career watching the Energy Store builders during the Great Recession of 2007 do far better as our market penetration numbers increased from 9 to 25% during the recession. And it just shows if you can deliver a better experience, you also tend to ride through the downtimes. So that's the user experience imperative that I see. Next is affordability. Don't need to do much here. I have a lot more to say in my other presentations and writing, but suffice to say, here's where we live in the US. There are 11 mega regions where you have strong transportation solutions connecting the regions. I'll highlight them here. And I show them because this is the part of the countries where we can afford and not afford to buy homes, as indicated by the orange circles, which are not affordable, and the green circles, which are affordable. And if I superimpose those 11 mega regions, you'll see virtually like 80% of where we live is not affordable. It's it's all orange circles. And there's some circles where you can't afford in mid-Atlantic markets and Midwest markets, but basically all the major cities are getting out of reach of buyers. And if nothing else, just look at the everyday statistics that we see every day, and you can see the symptoms that we're a house poor country. 40% of Americans can't pay a $400 unexpected expense. 80% of workers are living paycheck to paycheck. Car loans have delinquency on payments has risen to 7 million, a level never seen even in the Great Recession 2007 to 2010, we're at 6 million. We are truly struggling to pay our bills. So we know we're house poor. And we even see the demographics where we want to live and where we're moving is more and more to locations that are affordable. This just sums it up. If you look at this curve, this cannot go on. You cannot have that divergence between the median price and the median income keep going in this trend and not hit a cliff when virtually you cannot afford to buy the product. If the customer can't afford, that's a problem. And so this trend is not sustainable. So we know we have an affordability crisis. On the trade side, essentially, everything's an issue. The availability, the quality, the training, cost, productivity, the waste they create. It's just a huge nightmare. And you can look at all the different surveys and data. This is one of the most recent that's out there. 81% of construction firms having trouble filling both salaried and hourly craft positions. Almost 3/4 of the industry believe labor shortage is the biggest hurdle this year during the pandemic, when historic supply chain issues are also present. This is top of mind. We know this is the issue that is the biggest struggle for the industry. Then moving to productivity, it's just visually stunning to compare the auto industry to the housing industry. 1903, when the horse and buggy was dominating that Easter Day parade, this was how cars were made in a back room somewhere, piece by piece. And then when we had the disruption, it was a complete flip to the assembly line process, Model T, assembly line here. And then you look at an assembly line today, the robotics and all the automation and a stunning lack of workers, I might add as well. It's just, again, visually obvious how this industry has just innovated to be more productive. In comparison, here's how a house was framed in 1877 in Nebraska. This is from the archives of the Smithsonian. And fast forward to a picture of a house being framed today, 140 years plus later. And I would challenge people to come up with innovations in how we frame homes. You know, it's Western platform versus balloon framing, engineered lumber, connectors, power tools. Very quickly, you run out of innovation. And what's also disturbing is the job site in 1877, with all the materials strewn on the site, has not changed. It's the same today. There is so much waste in our process. We cannot keep absorbing that much waste. And when you compare the construction industry to manufacturing, as was done in this McKinsey study, it's almost a 2x difference in productivity between manufacturing and construction. We have a huge opportunity that's not being captured. And it is quantified by McKinsey to be about a $200 billion labor productivity gap. Clearly, we cannot sustain this inefficiency. And the last innovation is a lack of applying digital technology. You take the auto industry again, and they virtually build a car on the computer. So by the time you get to the manufacturing process, it fit, finish, trim, integrated systems, cost efficiencies, performance, the optimization that's able to happen with all this digital enhancement, automated learning, it is incredibly different from the housing industry. We have the ability, we have building information modeling and technologies there, but we don't have the industry that can apply it. And the benefits in terms of speed, quality, accuracy, efficiency, waste reduction, systems integration, machine learning, automated bill of materials and scheduling just is not happening. And we can, again, absorb the lack of efficiency and waste that's happening that can be resolved with digital technology. It has to happen. And when you see it in terms of data actually mapped out, again by McKinsey, you can see construction at the very bottom of all these industries that are laid out. And the only industry that is faring worse is agriculture and hunting, where you would not expect a lot of digital technology. What's really disturbing about the construction assessment is you hardly see any yellow or green at all in every aspect of the industry. It is completely lacking. So this for me informs 4 major disruptions that almost have to happen. When I look at hard trends like this and look at the research and the data, it tells me with certainty where the future has to go. And basically it is these 4 disruptions: the user experience optimization path, mass customization, software as a service aggregator, because the existing infrastructure doesn't have the skill and resources to do it themselves, and offsite construction. All of these are integrated and for me happen as a kind of a coordinated system of disruption. So let's look at each. Essentially, after 5 years of engaging the housing industry, hundreds of builders executives in 2-day meetings and going through a framework for optimization, I'm pretty comfortable this is a incredibly effective way to benchmark the housing user experience. It's 5 key experiences: community, design, performance, quality, and sales. And at 0 is the lowest level where you don't address the experience, and 5 is the highest. You know, a typical spider diagram. I'm a hard grader. I've looked at literally tens of thousands of homes worth of construction during the time I was privileged to lead Energy Star and Zero Energy Ready Home. And I grade the industry at this level. Not saying the industry is bad as much as look how much opportunity there is for user experience, which is great because it entails both cost savings and added value. And when I looked at my job at the time I was leading like Energy Star and Zero Ready, this is where I got frustrated. This is all I was doing. I was basically moving the industry on one of the 5 legs of the 5-legged stool. And if you didn't do the other 4 legs, design, quality, sales, community, you had a very wobbly business setting. And a very high likelihood you see very little impact just from doing Zero Energy Ready Home. And that has led me to shift career points to a user experience based target for myself, with the goal to make the high performance builders user experience leaders and therefore the most successful in the industry, and get them to this kind of point. This is where I can focus my energy right now. And what I do is I have the privilege to work with Sara and her team on workshops. Eventually we get back to doing in-person meetings, I hope. Again, this goal to make high performance builders the user experience leaders, so they in fact are driving the industry's success. They are the best. And so this is a really important move for me personally, and a big shift in my career. Now, the next disruption is mass customization. And I'll just show by example the potential for it. There's lots of forms it can take. It doesn't have to be this type of house. It could be a very simple architectural configuration. But a good friend of mine who owns Digibuild, John McLinden, applies this concept as well as anyone I've seen. And essentially, he develops basic building blocks for his projects and builds them over and over again. So you see you have an A, B, C, D, E, F building block. And what they do is apply them so the plans work off those building blocks and know how to optimize every facet of how it's applied. So by example, you see the A's, the kitchen eating area, B is the great room off that, D is the mud room and half bath, C is the stairs in circulation, but you kind of get the idea. And the upstairs is just reapplying the same building blocks. If you want a 3rd story, all you do is add another layer of the same building blocks. But what's great is when you infuse expert solutions, world-class experts into these building blocks and build them over and over again, you are mass customizing an incredible user experience. And again, with design, technology, health, zero quality, you kind of can pick where the expertise lies. But essentially, what is the secret sauce is you have limited options that create diverse experiences in terms of the streetscapes. So I can go 2 or 3 stories, 2 or 3 truss configurations, a couple of pop-out window options, a few front porches, some siding trim solutions, and a few color packages. And it's amazing what those 6 building blocks look like. Nothing like a production builder track street. It has this kind of diverse capability. And yet I'm just building my same 6 building blocks. I can optimize all the materials. I can optimize and build the same kitchen and the same bath over and over again and lock in economy of scale benefits from doing that. And the actual project fulfills that kind of rich, diverse outcome. And I would challenge anyone to say this looks like a tract development And again, realizing how important landscaping is, you can see that right away the landscaping's in and will further make the street a very compelling solution. That's the power of mass customization, and it's exterior and interior building blocks that you build over and over again to get economy of scale. And so next disruption is software as a service aggregator. We have these 5 crises that we discussed. We develop mass customized solutions that apply that world-class expertise. Now we have a digital worthy product. It's a lot of resources and cost and time to get a set of plans digitized. You want to make sure it's worthy, that it's optimized for experience, that it's going to leverage mass customization. Now I have a brand promise built around those attributes. I can deliver with the digital technology this world-class design, all the construction documents, bill of materials, scheduling, and construction instructions to enhance the trades. I address all these pain points that we discussed for the building industry. The user experience just goes up substantially, and we develop systems for extracting data, big data, to continually inform and automate upgrades to the continuous improvement process. And this is the new player that I'm predicting will come to the housing industry as an outside player, but solve all these pain points. And it's because the individual builder does not have the resources and internal skill sets within the organizations to do it. And it'll be amazing benefit to the builder. Last item is just offsite construction. Huge advantages in terms of waste, quality, cycle time, trades, and rework, and at scale cost. I will mention, though, that offsite construction uses more materials. The process of transporting and how modules and panels join together often entails more materials, but all these benefits can absorb that one downside. And the reason why you have so much faster construction time is while the site is being developed and foundations built, you can be building the home at the exact same time. In contrast, site-built construction has to wait for the foundation before they can build a home, and the building process is much faster for offsite because it assembles on site very quickly. Now, what's really interesting is our country's way, way behind in terms of applying offsite and all of its benefits. Japan, a lot of European countries are about 15%. A country like Sweden is an amazing example. It's small, but it's almost 85% of all homes are factory made, and the US is about 3%. So there's a huge opportunity to just address this incredible trade challenge moving to offsite construction. Lots of choices, and I won't go through those for the sake of time, but I will connect the dots and just show you how all these work together. When we first develop a user optimized designs, we're addressing the user experience imperative, and we are extracting tremendous cost savings and being more efficient in space and materials, so it's more affordable. Then in mass customization, we're going to actually develop it so we can keep building the same building blocks over and over based on those optimized designs and get also other additional cost savings. The software as a service aggregator will now digitize these solutions, so we get innovation through digital technology and through all the optimization for construction instructions, tremendous productivity gains. And finally, we integrate all this with offsite companies, so this incredibly enhanced user experience product can be made in factories and address the trade issue, and I believe over time also enhance affordability. All I do to see the future is connect the dots from all this crisis-driven pain points and the solutions just waiting to happen to make it work. So I hope this makes sense for you, and I'm going to pass it along to one of my favorite builders, Gene Myers.
That's right, indeed. For our final presentation of the day, we're joined by Green Builder Media's 2021 Sustainability Superhero, though you might know him from his day job as CEO and co-founder of Thrive Home Builders, a 6-time winner of the Department of Energy's Grand Award for Innovation, the first production builder to deliver solar standard homes and build net zero communities. I've got to be talking, of course, about Gene Myers. Gene. We just got to unmute you. All right, Gene, we should be able to hear you now.
Okay, yeah, I think I was unmuted, but maybe somebody else didn't have me muted. I need to get my screen up here. Can everybody see my screen, I hope?
Yes, but we cannot see your slides if you're wanting. Oh, now we're getting closer.
Okay, well, did I actually wait through all this technology okay?
Almost. We can see the presenter mode, so you may need to switch to the other screen.
Okay. I went the wrong direction, didn't I?
Oh, I think we're almost there.
I can get to my toolbar here. I think I can do this. I'm not a web user here. How's that?
There we
a little
are.
better?
Looking
Okay.
good now.
Well, everyone, as I was saying, good morning or good afternoon based on where you may be. And I have to tell you that I've done two versions of this. Sara may be chuckling in the background, but one way of reading the task here was to give you pointers on leadership lessons that we've learned at Thrive. And I have that canned presentation ready. So if anyone wants it, just ask for it. But in attending the last 2 days of the symposium, it struck me that maybe I should shift gears. And so I have kind of gone back to the new day for the building industry to talk more about what we're doing to address the challenges that have been discussed over the last couple of days. I think this morning, President Biden did today commit the U.S. to cut greenhouse emissions 50% by 2030. It was widely reported he was also going to announce net zero by 2050. I'm not sure if that's happened yet in the climate conference that's going on today. We're facing a smaller world. We're based in Denver, and Denver has a goal of cutting greenhouse emissions 80% by 2050. And then in Fort Collins, their goal is 80% by 2030 and zero by 2050. Also, this is so timely. You know, Andrew Winston this morning was talking about just within the last few weeks, all the movement that's happened. But just yesterday, a dozen governors asked Biden to require all electric cars by 2035. Denver has a requirement that all new homes will be zero energy by 2024. And, you know, as a builder, that's today. You better be designing it today if you're going to be delivering it by 2024. The cost of zero energy are coming down. The consumers are ready, we think. We've been building net zero homes for quite some time. It is interesting. I don't think the building codes are keeping up. And so we'll continue to lean on the zero energy ready guidelines that Sam's program put together. We think health in the home is also very important as an emphasis for the future. The first being pathogens, which of course is top of mind for our consumers right now, coming out of the pandemic. In our climate, not every climate, but in our climate, we need to add humidity just so our body's defenses are working well. And we know dehumidification is an issue in much of the country, but not so where we build. Radon's a big issue in our market. We're in the hottest radon zone in the country. So all of our homes over and above the EPA and DORA Plus programs come with radon mitigation and will continue to. Source control, in other words, don't build with bad stuff and properly ventilate. Those are the real pillars of EPA and DORA Plus. We're really big believers in these third-party programs because they come with an awful lot of support, marketing support, expertise. These programs are vested in builders' success, and it's nice to have the support when you need it from the federal programs. But they also have a foundation of building science that is really hard science coming from the national labs. Water conservation is an increasingly important thing here on the Front Range of Colorado. And in northern Colorado, it's almost as if you better find the water and then look for the land because it has become such a difficult challenge. And again, the federal program we lean on is EPA WaterSense. We're moving to electrification. We think you've got to take steps towards the carbon goals that have been discussed throughout the last 2 days. And the first step, we think, is let's get the fossil fuels out of the house. And that poses challenges and some consumer biases, but you're looking at cooking, heating, hot water heating, and the fireplace. And the picture on this slide is a home that we built for an EBA summit for last September that didn't happen. It was a virtual summit, but it is an all-electric home, and it does show that these homes can be market acceptable and beautiful. Sam talked about digital design. John McClendon, our mutual friend, provided this image. We really think it's time to get to digital design for that waste and cost reduction to help get to housing affordability. But beyond that, we really see it as such an important step in getting to carbon neutrality. In other words, not just going to kind of a carbon-free operation by getting fossil fuels out of the homes, but also calculating the embodied carbon of our products and going after carbon offset for those. So we don't know quite how to do it unless you are doing digital design. I would bet that the public thinks that builders know more about what go in the houses than they actually do, because so many of those decisions are actually made by subcontractors. And so the key here is let's find out every piece and part that goes into a home. We can't calculate the embodied carbon without that. So we see moving to this digital design as an integral step of getting to our carbon footprint. Sam also mentioned offsite construction, and the obvious ones are panelization, usually with just a raw lumber panel or modular. I have to confess skepticism about those because we've done this and I'd say attempted it. We've completed projects that are panelized projects. We've moved entire homes completely built out in a factory and slid onto foundations. Each of those have their disadvantages, and the primary one for just raw panelization is you still have to have a framer and you still have to have all the trades. And what we find is we get penalized if we rock their world by asking them to do something differently. This image is courtesy of Vega Building Systems here in Denver. And Joel and David Cohen are launching this company with closed panels and the complete services necessary to deliver us a shell. There's kind of a commercial analog to this core and shell construction. And that way we're not stuck with, as David says, asking our framer to come back and do a thimble's worth of work because we're going to pay a shipping container's price for that thimble's worth of work unless there's more of a turnkey approach happening. We're also concerned about assuring the performance of our homes. We've gone to this kind of a white room approach to our mechanical rooms. If we're trying to convince our customers that our mechanical rooms are the lungs of the home, they better not look all dirty with a bunch of paint stored next to the air handler. But there was a disturbing study that was, the preliminary results were presented a year ago at the ResNet conference, that some of our high performance homes really aren't performing very well due to the complexity, lack of maintenance, sometimes improper commissioning, and even improper installation. And so we're looking at this new term, this home as a service, a little bit differently, and that is to come alongside our customers after they are occupying the home and provide the maintenance, get the furnace filters changed, check out the house. Now, perhaps even taking the output from real-time air quality monitoring, temperature monitoring, and energy consumption and water consumption, and using that data to inform more of a proactive approach to providing service to our customers long after closing. And we think this is all now. You know, these aren't just what we have to do in the future. We have projects on the boards addressing every one of these concepts. And we're in this position where the political will is emerging. I think the stark contrast between the Trump administration and the Biden administration really can't be overstated. I was a judge on the Solar Decathlon student competition last weekend, and Energy Secretary Granholm is a far cry from Rick Perry. And I really believe that we will see an intelligent, strategic approach to helping builders build better homes and helping the planet get to the climate goals that it needs. We think consumers are way ahead of the industry. At least that's what we see in our niche. We have the building science, we have the technology, we have the manufacturer products. We just need builders to lead the way. And I love this poster. Aaron Smith, who's the CEO of the Energy and Environmental Building Alliance, put this together and gave me permission to use it today. But this actually comes from a plumber poster, believe it or not, back in the 19-teens or 20s, where you know, we think plumbing is just sort of table stakes, but there was a time when if you didn't have indoor plumbing and lived in a city, you were in a disease-prone situation. And they had a kind of a similar poster about how plumbers were protecting the health of the nation. Well, who knew that? But, you know, from our first presenter, Michael Mann, he made the point that we have a lot to do with this carbon situation, accounting for nearly 20% of the total emissions. And who would have thought that builders could actually lead the way in a significant way to solve the significant problems that our planet is facing? And so I'd like to challenge the builders who are on the call to stop thinking of ourselves as a construction company and think of ourselves as leading the way to a much more sustainable built environment. I feel like that's the point of the last 2 days, and it's been a privilege to be a part of it. And I think we might have been running a little behind schedule. I hope I got us back on schedule. So I'm gonna wrap it up here. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Gene. Really appreciate it. And always good to hear your voice and see you. And congratulations again on the Sustainability Superhero Award. That concludes our program for day 2 of the symposium. But for those who would like to stick around, we're going to hold a Q&A session for our attendees, and I've been putting that periodically in the chat box. Those who regularly attend the symposium know this is something that we usually offer when we're all together. We really wanted to try and retain that important element of the in-person event in this virtual format. So please type in your questions into the chat box and I'll convey them on your behalf. I wanted to start with a question from Rob. And this question was for Sam. In regards to the trades, what has the wage growth looked like in the last 15 years to be able to recall people into that industry?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know the actual number of wage growth, but before I left the Department of Energy, I put a workforce presentation together, and I compared the incomes for all the various trades to the incomes for the leading career paths for college graduates. And it was stunning to see that it took 4 years of college, the very tiny difference between what you could do earning a pretty equivalent income right out of high school or after a short training program to go into the trades. And so where I don't know the percent growth, what I know is that the trade pay structure is like this little hidden secret that we never talk about, that if you go into the trades, that your income earning potential is almost on par with a college graduate because they have gone up so much. I just don't know the percent.
Rob, I could just weigh in a little bit. I think it's just really a boom and bust situation. I think right now labor is at such a premium that it is very high, and it is kind of that hidden. But we've been through the times here in Denver where a builder will take a 4x8 piece of OSB and just advertise it $1 more than whatever you're making per hour. I think we're so far past that where these are piecework jobs for the most part, and they are really rich right now. But in a recession, they crash. And so it's really an up and down moving target at any point in the cycle.
Sara, I didn't know if you were seeing anything in regards to cognition on some of this wage growth or not.
What we're tracking is, Jean said, where it's kind of cyclical and kind of just moves with the other kind of general economic factors and kind of goes up. One thing that we are tracking through builder surveys is just kind of the struggle with attracting skilled labor and different kinds of incentives that builders are using to bring employees on board, but then also to work with specialty contractors. And we're seeing a lot of folks offering performance-based pay, where the base salaries for employees or the payments to contractors are kind of market rate, but there are incentives for hitting milestones and being on time with work and kind of that performance.
Sure, yeah.
There's also what we're seeing is more investment on behalf of certain builder companies in training and education, which is really something that seems to be attractive to employees, even recruiting some of the younger generations, millennials and Gen Zs, where they have an opportunity for career advancement and for those training and education scenarios and opportunities. And then something else that we're seeing in addition to those pay incentives is the opportunity to kind of work with innovative technologies in the field. So whether those are training apps or other types of, again, compelling, sophisticated, enabling technologies, that seems to be a draw as well, beyond just the money itself.
Mike, I could relay kind of an anecdote from one of our framers. Framing foreman today on a single family site is making well over $100,000 a year. And then as to training, everybody on this screen and maybe many of the people who are in the audience know what EBA is, the Energy and Environment Building. So we're investigating launching subcontractor training and starting with the HVAC industry because we find the lack of skill in that particular segment really is a hindrance to high performance building. And so I think just learning that we can't just assume that that labor is going to be there on call. We're going to have to develop the labor pool, and if we want it to be high quality, we're going to have to invest in the training to make it a worthwhile career.
One more point on that. I'm kind of big on a number of innovations that will work around either the constraints of the labor pool or enhance accountability. So an example of the former is plug and play duct systems. DOE made a great investment in this innovation. It's now being offered to the market through a company called RIA. But essentially, a number of things happen. One is it just assembles. It's a very elegant system of parts, airtight. When you just snap the parts together, they can't leak. So you take that part out of the equation. Secondly, the way the ducts are run is elegantly simple because they're simple 2.5-inch ducts that are home runs from a plenum. And they have a very discrete airflow amount that can be very simply assembled for each room. So if a room has 70 CFM of flow and each of those delivers 25 CFM, you just put 3 together and run them to the room in 3 locations with better mixing. So essentially the innovation is displacing the skill set problems in the field, both in terms of layout, airflow, air leakage. And so I think there's some innovations that do that. The other one is automated fault detection and diagnostics. Right now, Emerson makes a system, Sensi Predict, and it's just 10 sensors, 15 minutes, and you'll see if the airflow, refrigerant charge, static pressure are correct. And basically, warning lights will go off before the installation crew can leave. And until they get it right and have no warning lights, you essentially mitigate the installation defects and create an incentive to get it right so they can leave the job. So I'm going to suggest that some of these trade issues can also be addressed a little bit by the innovations that are ready or waiting to happen.
We have a couple questions. Clearly, we have builders in the audience because we've got a couple very building-specific questions for Gene and for Sam here. The first is from Steve. He wanted to know, is there a good mix of trying to use, like, let's say, SIPs for the shell, trusses for the roof, framing on the interior? Like, what are you seeing out there in the field as far as different high-performance systems?
Well, what I'm seeing is pretty much that slide Sam had, where most of what's being done, particularly in the production builder world, is still very much SIP framing. I think that there are great technologies like SIPs or thermal bridging free systems. We need to see ways for the cost to come down on those, for those to be widely adopted. Although, with the way lumber is going up, maybe that time is now. It's something that we're looking at all the time. But the closed panel system that we're investigating at Thrive with Vega Building Systems is kind of framing system agnostic. It could easily be a SIPS panel for exterior walls and with either roll the floors in the field or floor panels, prefab trusses. And the whole idea here is that this core and shell concept is delivered by a factory with field labor, and so it's able to be optimized. I guess that's the point. It could be optimized with steel studs. It could be optimized with wood studs. It could be optimized with SIPs. I think that's where we're going to have to go because we're just seeing the commodities getting nuts. We just last night got a report on lumber. We're up 180% in the last year for lumber. And this particular vendor is predicting double-digit lumber increases per month going forward for the foreseeable future. So I think it's going to push us all into looking at not just performance optimization, but cost optimization.
You know, for me, I just would love to get a really detailed cost analysis done on SIPs or other advanced systems compared to framing packages. I actually was working with one of Gene's staff before he left, after he got a framing package bid and compared it to SIPs. And I went kind of crazy because it was an apples and orange comparison. It was a framing package to a SIP package. But, you know, there's these amazing additional cost benefits to the innovation, the advanced technology to the old stick framing. For instance, with a SIP roofing package, I get rid of a whole array of air barrier details, from shafts to knee walls to drop ceilings, wind baffles, penetrations, duct boots. There's a whole array of Swiss cheese between the attic ceiling and the attic itself that just goes away. And then all the air sealing goes away. You have to air seal every drywall panel to the top frame. You have all the air sealing for, again, wiring and penetrations. So that whole package goes away. And if I'm using SIP roofs, I don't have to do venting, soffit, ridge vents, or gable vents. And then what also goes away is the cost for the crane for the roofing that's being installed on the truss roof. So as soon as the crane lifts the roof panels in for SIPs, then it can lift the roofing materials right on top of those, so you don't need the crane for the roofer. And that's like $1,000 a day or whatever it costs. Then the other thing is that goes away is that I have all this useful space where the attic volume was just truss space that could be used for storage, maybe extra rooms, it could be used for mechanical systems. There's all this value for the space that's not being counted in the normal comparison of a framing package to a SIP package. And then it's about 2 to 3, 4 days faster to do that assembly. And it's about $500 to $800 a day for a builder normally for each day of construction. So honestly, I haven't, on an actual project, just have everyone around that needs to be there at the table just crunching the numbers, but I would like to crunch the numbers with all the credits and debits. And I think that the cost difference is a lot less. And then I think when you also add up that you only have a one-sided air barrier assembly at the attic, you have the fluffy insulation exposed to the attic, and it's like wearing a sweater without a liner on a cold day. It's like, I think over time it compresses. Mine compressed about 50%, my attic insulation. It also, under driving forces, you have humidity and temperature can go through it because there's no air barrier on the top side. So just the performance of the attic compared to a 6-sided assembly like a SIP roof is probably, I think, half as good. I'd have to, again, I don't think the software begins to account for the superior benefits of how the building science works with a SIP panel compared to just loose insulation in an attic. So I think if we actually just put pencil to paper and can put these numbers together, I think we'd come up with some interesting comparisons. And I think roofs are a killer application. On top of that, in terms of wildfire, I don't have any vents for embers to get into an attic, so it's more wildfire resistant. It's stronger. So again, it goes on and on. There's just all these benefits I just don't think are in the cost accounting. And until we do that, then I'd like to know those numbers before I will concede that the SIP is a higher cost strategy, at least for the roofs. I think it's a killer application.
Sam, you know I love you. However, we're in the middle of that analysis.
Your microphone's not working, Gene.
It
I like
says
the fact that you let me go.
Am I good now? So you know I love you, Sam, but we're in the middle of this analysis right now, construction instructions, looking over our shoulder for extreme panels so that it is the fair heads up comparison. Here's the thing, we can't get our framer to quote the rest of the work. And it's not like, oh, he came in lower height. We can't even get him to take the time to do the takeoff because he doesn't want to do the work.
That's right.
This is our challenge in the industry, and that's why we're attracted to Vega, because they're taking that out of the equation. And it may well be that an optimal scenario will be SIP's components in this turnkey solution for the core and shell, but we can't get over the speed bumps within our own supply chain to ever even get to the estimate you want, Sam. And that's what we're up against.
Yeah, and I'm just frustrated because what I know is a better technology, more quality control, more dimensionally accurate, faster, is not getting to market because the speed bumps are stopping everybody. And to some degree, I think it's the fault of the supplier. I think the SIP industry needs to figure out how to reduce friction, and whether they have to provide a combination solutions where they can come in and deliver the entire shell and the interior framing. They need to figure it out, because you can't have that friction and be expected to have to manage it. You have 1,000 things on your plate that are going to drive you crazy. My frustration is I know it's a roof I would want. I don't want a one-sided assembly in my attic. It's just the most egregious environment, and I want an advanced high-performance system. So I just want to work the problem. I'm just not in the position, and I just think somewhere there's a solution if we can get the right people at the table. And I think you're right. If that's the friction you're facing, you're stuck. And so somehow the right team has to come together to get past those speed bumps. But I think there's a solution there.
Sara?
Yeah, thanks. So this is a really interesting discussion because this is something that we're paying a lot of attention to. I think we all know and can agree that the, kind of terrible trifecta of soaring lumber prices, which at today's cost, not even going up, to the level that Jean just mentioned in terms of continuing to grow, but at today's cost, it's estimated that lumber prices have added about $24,000 to the cost of a typical American home. Along with labor shortages and challenges, which we've addressed a little bit, along with just general material shortages. I think we can all agree that our sector is moving towards panelization, prefab, alternative building systems, which is kind of funny that they're called alternative, but so I think we can all agree about that. And I also agree with both Jean and Sam that, kind of the silver bullet question right now is how do we get to a place where we can streamline the solutions? Because, Jean, I think your experience is not unique. We talk with builders and developers across the country who, tell us the same thing, that they want to achieve certain efficiencies in their businesses. They want to achieve certain performance targets, but it's a little bit too hard just to make a transition, just a wholesale transition from how they're doing business today, how they're building today, to a new system. With that said, I agree that some of that onus has to be on the builder, but it also has to be on the manufacturers, and that this is part of that massive transformation that I talked about, that Sam talks about, Jean, that you talk about, that we're undergoing right now. And that I think we're going to start seeing more and more kind of comprehensive and integrated solutions really within the next 12, 24 months and beyond, because we're working with people that are working to solve for this, where, Jean, you don't have to necessarily go to your channels and your contractors to get some of these answers, but that they will be provided to you by the manufacturers, or frankly a whole new set of people coming into the industry who are very well capitalized right now, that are kind of considering themselves as kind of the Tesla of the housing industry, where they're going to bring really kind of reimagined novel ideas that step away from the more traditional ways that we have designed and built homes and communities, with completely, again, reimagined, rethought, redesigned solutions for building systems as well as communities. And honestly, if as a recovered venture capitalist, if I were kind of betting my money, I think it's going to be those folks in combination, Jean, with you and your peers, the really high performance healthy home builders that are willing to make that change, that are going to be the winners. I think, and the last thing we'll say is, I think that we have to get there, right? Like it doesn't make sense to stick frame the way that we did. It doesn't make sense from a cost standpoint. It doesn't make sense from an environmental standpoint. It doesn't make sense from a construction scheduling standpoint or from a labor standpoint or a material standpoint. And so, we're kind of going through the eye of the needle right now, so to speak. And, it may be, painful. I in my opening comments yesterday, I said, look, like the caterpillar and the butterfly, the process of transformation is painful and it can be ugly. But at the end, ultimately, it's beautiful and very cathartic. And I think we're going through that somewhat painful and ugly time right now, where we're all just groping around in the dark, trying to figure out how to do this thing. But I do think that we're getting there. And I also think, again, last thing, some of our colleagues, and I'll use Ted Clifton as an example, he will say to anyone, he can build 6 homes with SIPs faster and for less money than his colleagues are building, 5 conventionally framed or even advanced framed homes. He loves to tout that he bought his Tesla with cash. And, like he's got the performance and the economic data to prove it. Now, he's streamlined a model that works for him in his geography for his business, and that may not be applicable for, every builder everywhere. But, I think that that's really the direction.
I hate to beat a dead horse, and we may only get around to 2 questions, Mike, but here's why we're headed the direction.
What you ask, right? If you really want the answer.
Yeah, here's the reason that we're going the direction we're going. And again, it could well include SIPs, but we know that the raw lumber panel doesn't do much for us. It doesn't improve performance. It does save some time, but we can lose that time just waiting for a building permit. It's just not so impactful. Or waiting for an inspection, but it's not so impactful that it's worth upsetting the entire supply chain. So the thought is, get a panel that doesn't just try to replace a third or half of a frame. Get a panel that insulates. Get a panel that includes doors and windows. Get a panel that includes the weather-resistant barrier. Get a panel that includes drywall and wiring. And so now we're not just shortening the duration of all of those tasks. Oh, and that also does interior walls. Because a lot of these, the reason the framer has to come back is because the system doesn't take care of the floor, the roof, or the interior walls. And so if you could do that, you can reduce the duration, not just of the task of each of those trades, but you can reduce the downtime between the trades, which in a trade shortage might be the longest period of time in the construction schedule of a house, is when nothing is happening. And so it's my view that the solution has to be a much more integrated solution than just a structural solution. It needs to solve this friction, as Sam put it, he's right on. It needs to solve the friction of getting the rest of the house built, and that's what we hope we're on the cusp of breaking the code on, so that we can really address affordability, efficiency, quality, all of the things that we've been talking about today.
So Gene, you just described with immense accuracy the Swedish home building industry. That's exactly what it does. And I'll also throw a plug. We have Anthony Gensler speaking on May 19th. Mike, correct me. And he's going to just do a solid hour on the Swedish housing industry, which I think everyone should listen to, because it is everything that you just asked for. And they build virtually passive house performance into these amazing price points. And the way they retail, the way they instill quality, the way they leverage automation and digital technology, it is the entire package. It's why I end the book Housing 2.0 on the Swedish housing industry, because it just is what housing could look like. And so it's great. It's interesting to hear you lay that out and go, yeah, that's what the Swedish are doing.
Well, that's what the Denverites are doing.
Well, if we can keep answers somewhat concise, we've got 3 really good questions I'd like to get to in the next 10 minutes. Can we do that? Okay. All right. Cool. So
Maybe.
we're good. Okay. So here we go. From our friend Jack Armstrong, who we all know. He's asking, what do you think is the best way to help a high performance builder consider a new building envelope system, since it's so much about the upfront planning, the schedules, and dealing with those downstream trades? It always seems like it's too much to bite off, like you were talking about, Gene. They won't even bid it out. Should they consider a one-off house, or just a partial part of an existing house, like an addition maybe, or just a simple roof structure? What's the entry point?
I hate to talk so much, but I don't think there is another entry point other than to solve the problem, as we've been discussing.
Your mic, Gene.
Well, I need somebody to do that mic for me, I think.
Just try to, it's working. You're cutting out every once in a while.
Oh, sorry. So I think you've just got to solve the big problem, Jack. To say that you're going to bring in a whole set of other subs for part of a house, add that to the schedule, I just don't think that works. So I think we've just got to focus on the problem. How do we get enough value add in these systems that and reduce that friction so that they can become viable?
All right. Next question comes to us from some of you, probably all of you know Kim Shanahan. In order to solve the housing crisis, is not the answer to abandon customization and bring back Levittown's built-in modular factories?
I could take that one.
Go ahead, Sam. I know it's a little bit of what Sara was talking about with, really kind of doing things in a new way. Does it harken back to an old way?
Let's not do Levittown, but there's again, a mass customization strategy where you can build tremendous diversity and richness with strategically offering options in the right places. I mentioned siding and trim, color, porches, maybe a few pop-outs. If we build Levittown over and over again, I don't know. It's a pretty bland product with no risk on color, no risk on materials, on landscaping. So I think the basic of a repeatable product is really important, but I think there has to be some expert-infused solutions on the inside, the bathrooms, the kitchens, and on the outside, and how it can be customized. Mass customized.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll chime in on this one too. Yeah, thanks. So I agree with Sam. I'm going to kind of put what he just said in a little bit of a different way. I think that on one hand, I believe in kind of mass customization, we'll say, where there's kind of a foundation and a core offering, and then there are elements that can be customized, because I think you need to have some choice that you offer to homeowners, whether that's colors and surfaces and textures and upgraded appliances and different types of fixtures and features. With that said, I think builders like Gene at Thrive Homes, prefab builders like Devell, and I could list a bunch of others that say, we're going to be the Apple of home builders, where we give homeowners things that they don't even know that they want, like healthy homes, like super high performance homes, and they actually build in, whether it's advanced heat pump technology or solar or integrated indoor air quality systems into that basic home offering, and they streamline that so they can keep prices down. But the customization again comes in some of the things that are baseline versus upgrades, again with respect to fixtures and features and colors, color palettes, and textures. But I think that the onus is on us as building professionals that are dedicated to enhancing the performance of the built environment, and knowing the people that are on that have asked questions like Steve and Jack and Kim. I know all of you. I know what you build, or, you know, kind of help other builders build, and you're in the same, you know, we're singing in the same choir here. You know, the onus is on us to, what we streamline are the things that really will make a difference with respect to performance and sustainability, health and wellness, intelligent and connected living, those types of things. And then the customization comes in a different form.
Mike, two quick sentences. Number one, our consumers are really sophisticated, and I doubt that they're going to accept Levittown. The next piece is the cities. More and more cities are judging builders and projects by the kind of housing stock that they deliver. And Levittown's happening right now with LGI and DR Horton Express and other builders. Not every municipality wants that in their housing stock. So the opportunity for a high performance builder is to break the code on the inefficiency in the system so that we can deliver really great product to people who need it most.
All right, final question, and it's one that's kind of big picture, so we're going to end on a big picture here. It's from Mira. Wanted to know, as an architect in an island community overwhelmed with urban flight and outdated land use regulations, how do we address existing homes and just plain housing shortages?
Sam's the expert.
Yeah, I often refer to our nation's housing stock as the infrastructure issue we don't talk about. You know, when we talk about infrastructure, it's roads, it's utility grid, it's the water system, and but our housing infrastructure is so out of date, substandard compared to how we build today, low performance, high maintenance. It's a huge, huge challenge. So, now, there are a number of, this question is loaded with a lot of complexity in terms of what it takes to do it. First, an assessment whether it's worth keeping the house that's there already or just taking it down. You know, I think that's like first question you have to ask. If there's so much substandard attributes to the house, whether it's the floor plan, the construction, some of the dangerous materials that are embedded, whether it's lead and pipes and wiring systems. So you have to really first have that assessment. And I think where we have opportunities to really streamline new homes with offsite, we have the same with existing homes. And again, the demonstration there is this group, Energy Sprong, that came out of Netherlands and it's moving through Europe. And they do an amazing job taking a house that is worthy of preserving and in 3 days transforming it into a passive house level performance at great economy because it integrates digital technology, it has factory production, it does all the things we talked about for new construction for existing. And so there's a system to look at. The big difference for me with what they do is they also include the roof where they just overlay the roof, and I would just update the existing attic as it is. But essentially, there are models for how it could be done, and I would suggest looking at Energy Sprong as one of the best answers.
You know, I think it's a huge issue, and in all the municipalities, we see them moving to net zero codes for new construction, but that is such a small percentage of housing stock out there. And if you're ignoring the rest of the housing stock, I think it's an issue. I have one kind of a simple-minded suggestion that perhaps could unleash market forces on that. Require and publish a HERS score and an energy calculation on every resale home that goes into MLS.
Like your
our customers right now, it's an opaque market. They're buying that beautiful old home, but they have no idea what they're buying in terms of energy, health, safety. And we all, you know, we've all seen Money Pit, and we all know that many of these old beautiful neighborhoods. The homes there are potential money pits, but our customers, it's buyer beware. And I think every home should have a HERS score, and teach the consumer what the heck does it mean, and in terms of dollars per month to operate. And then perhaps at the point of sale, when a new mortgage is being originated, rehab money could be rolled into that in such a way that over time market forces could really improve our existing stock.
Sara, you get our final word on this one?
Yeah, I'll take a little bit of a different angle at this. I agree with everything that Sam and Jean said, but I think that there's another layer of this in terms of, because I think part of the question, if I remember correctly, was just kind of inventory shortages. And that is kind of the transformation of the existing built environment, not so much in terms of existing homes into more sustainable, higher performance, healthier existing homes, which obviously we need to make that transformation. And I think we'll continue to, I'm hoping we'll continue to see more incentives and rebates and things that will help facilitate that. But I think also if you look at the transformation of work and you look at what COVID has done with respect to, 3/4 of Americans are saying now that they never want to go back to the office full time. Maybe they'll go back a day or two a week or for key meetings, but they don't want to go back to offices every day like they used to. And I think that has already shifted, kind of what executives are doing with respect to big corporate campuses and office spaces. And I think a lot of those existing spaces that used to be office parks and office buildings are now going to shift partly to deployment facilities for online retailers like Amazon. But also, I think we can, remodel and retrofit some of those facilities to accommodate our urgent and desperate affordable housing crunch. If you look at the numbers, we have millions of people sleeping on the streets every night across the country in the most affluent and in some ways most advanced country in the world. That's just simply not acceptable. There's a solution for that. So I think that the conversation around existing homes can't only focus on existing homes. It's got to also look at, how do we retrofit some of this space that's not going to be used for purposes, pre-COVID purposes, to help solve for some of our housing shortage problems.
Well, thank you all very much. We've exhausted our time together, but I could sit and listen to you all talk for hours, but we do need to let people get out and enjoy the rest of their Earth Day and do good things. So I'm going to put a wrap on the Green Builder Media Sustainability Symposium 2021 into the light. Thank you to all who attended, who asked wonderful questions, and especially those who stuck around for a wonderful Q&A session. We couldn't do this without you. And we couldn't do this without wonderful sponsors like Train Technologies. So thank you very much. I hope you all have an exceptional Earth Day, and we'll see you at next year's Sustainability Symposium. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.